December 20th, 2023, signing day. 5 stars light up the headlines. KJ Bolden flips from FSU to UGA, Amaris Williams flips from Florida to Auburn, and Terry Bussey and Dominic McKinley decided to wait. 98% of the top 247 put pen to paper, and we proclaimed Georgia top dog of the cycle. That was one day. Since then, Nick Saban retired, the Wolverines won the national championship, and Jim Harbaugh left for the NFL. Only one college football playoff team still has the coach that led them there. Kalen DeBoer replaced the GOAT, and Sharon Moore became the first black head coach in Michigan football history. Portal King Kiffin has the #1 transfer class. Oregon took care of quarterbacks present and future, and Ohio State turns the tide, landing Caleb Downs and Bama's highest-ranked signee from December. So yeah, a lot has gone down, and a lot has already changed since the early signing period. Sure, most of the hay is in the barn, but college football these days is anything but stable. Time to tie a bow on the class of 2024. It's National Signing Day again. Hello and happy National Signing Day. We are thrilled you have decided to spend it here with us as we wrap up the 2024 recruiting cycle. It is officially coming to an end, you guys. Here in Studio A, I'm Emily Proud alongside National Recruiting Editor Brandon Huffman and National College Football Analyst Smoke Dixon. Over in our war room, holding down the fort, is our Director of Scouting, Andrew Ivins, and another member of our scouting team and National Recruiting Analyst, Cooper Patagna. We will go to them in just a bit, but first, let's tell you what's on tap for today's show. It is absolutely loaded. We have expert analysis of the top 30 classes, full positional breakdowns, conference superlatives. We got 2 live commitments, and as always, we would love to answer any questions that you've got. Let's start by hitting those headlines, guys. The biggest question mark going into today, the top athlete in the cycle, Terry Bussey. He entered the day an unsigned Texas A&M commit, and Aggies fans breathing a sigh of relief as he officially puts pen to paper. Huff, how important was this win for Mike Elko?
Oh, it was huge. I mean, to not get his signature in December was definitely worrisome. Then they had to hold off a late surge by Georgia, a late surge by LSU. Alabama was getting back involved. Those are 3 teams that have won national championships in recent years. So Texas A&M had to hold on for dear life. After seeing him at the Polynesian Bowl, you could see why everybody else wanted to get after him, but that was huge. They were able to breathe that sigh of relief, hold on to him, and this is the kind of impact player that Mike Elko can take and run with these next few years in College Station.
I've got more good news for the Aggies. Top 247 wide receiver Ashton Bethel Roman signing with Texas A&M today. He originally signed with Arkansas back in December, but was released from his NLI. Smoke, what kind of player are the Aggies getting?
Well, shout out to Coach LaFavors, my GA when he's at Bama. He's his head coach down there in his high school. But this kid has great pedigree. And when you look at him, you're seeing a silky smooth route runner. You throw the ball anywhere close to this guy, he's snagging it out the air. 21.5. 200-yard runner. So you know he has speed, but it's so deceptive because once he gets up on you, he's scoring. This is a playmaker. I like this kid a lot.
All right, outside of Bussey, 3 other 5 stars signed on the dotted line today. The number 8 player in the class, wide receiver Ryan Williams. You'll remember he and then recommitted to Alabama. He is officially a member of the Crimson Tide. Meanwhile, the number 1 player in Louisiana, defensive lineman Dominic McKinley signing with LSU, and wide receiver Gatlin Bair signing with Oregon. You think that Williams could make an impact year 1. Why?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you look at what Jamarcus Shepard did at Washington, he was getting his young receivers involved, even with Jalen McMillan and Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk. But more importantly, with Alabama needing a spark offensively, they need some weapons for Jalen Milroe to turn loose under Kalen DeBoer. Getting Ryan Williams is huge because it looked for a while like he might end up elsewhere with his reclassification from the 25 class to 2024 class. It now gives him that opportunity to be an instant impact player in Tuscaloosa, and it also hurts Auburn because Auburn was trying like mad to flip him. Walker White told me down in San Antonio that he was convinced Ryan Williams was going to be joining them in Auburn, but instead Jamarcus Shepard comes in with the pedigree of McMillan and Odunze and Polk. Kalen DeBoer already, who he lost some key players of the portal, but to get Ryan Williams and to get his signature, absolutely huge for Alabama to get this thing started under Kalen.
We'll talk more about the Tide's new-looking class from what it looked like in December in just a bit. But hey, it is not National Signing Day without a live commitment, and we've got Seattle native Rahshawn Clark, who is set to commit with us live on this show. He signed with Arizona in December after flipping late from Cal. Now Washington is in the mix. Who's the favorite in the race today?
Well, he did get out of his NLI from Arizona. In fact, it was on the way to the Polynesian Bowl. He lost coverage over the Pacific Ocean. Didn't even know the Jetfish had left for the Washington job. He lands, finds out the Jetfish is going to his backyard. John Richardson, the coach that was recruiting him at Arizona, joining him. So I like the Huskies to pull this one off. He was a Cal commit for 6 months. Arizona actually flipped him 2 days before the early signing period, and now he may end up ultimately coming full circle. We'll find out this afternoon.
Coaching changes are a theme of the show. Another live commitment. One of the top prospects out of Arizona, defensive lineman Keona Wilhite. He originally signed with Washington, also got out of his NLI after DeBoer left. He's taken a few visits. Currently, though, has 4 crystal balls in for Nebraska to land him, including one from UHuff. Why are the Huskers now the favorite?
Well, it looked for a while like UCLA might be in control of that race. He had taken an official visit there back in the spring, but Nebraska made a late surge. Blair Angula wrote a story a few weeks ago about how Nebraska paved the snow in the stadium just so the big red N at midfield could be shown for the Wilhite family to see. That may have been enough. Okay, it might have been a lot of other things. Defense coordinator Tony White has been key in that recruitment, but Nebraska making him feel like a priority. So the Huskers right now are in control, but again, this is a guy who thought he was going to Arizona, flipped to Washington, like we talked about with Rahshawn Clark. Jetfish ends up taking that job. Kalen DeBoer leaves. He decommits. Washington tried to keep him, but right now it looks like it's either going to be Nebraska or UCLA for Wilhite.
We have a full team breakdown of Nebraska right now on our 24/7 Sports YouTube page. You can check it out. But next in this show, we're going to head over to the War Room. Coop.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, Drew, we'd call it one little thing traditionally, but how about this? The news of the day so far, how about 5-star athlete Terry Bussey? He sticks with his commitment. Texas A&M, they hold off LSU, a surging Georgia as well. If you don't know anything about Terry Bussey, right, we are kind of talking this might be the best two-way athlete since Travis Hunter. Drew, what do you think about this pickup for the Aggies?
It's huge because Terry Bussey is one of one. We've used that term for a variety of different Sammy Brown on our freaks list, but Terry Bussey, number one, it's easy to root for him as an individual. This is a guy that lost his mother. He's lived with his high school coach, and he has done everything. He doesn't leave the athletic complex there at Timpson High School. 4-sport athlete, qualified for regionals and 4 different track events. He's a quarterback, almost 15,000 yards of total offense over his prep career, playing primarily quarterback. He's also played defense, 325 tackles, 30 interceptions, 8 pick sixes, and he scored 9 times via the return game. Mike Elko, I don't know where the Aggies plan to use him. I was texting someone in College Station this morning. It sounds like on defense, but I think they're going to give him a look on offense as well.
I texted a buddy at College Station. I said, hey, where is Terry Bussey going to play? They said everywhere, right? You would have to think, Terry Bussey, you talked about the stats, 15,000 yards, 227 touchdowns, 8 pick sixes with all of that as well. How about Texas A&M? We talked about Terry Bussey, a little bit about Ashton Bethel Roman as well. They go from 22 to 19. What do you like about what Mike Elko has been able to do so far?
I think they're rebuilding that secondary. And again, I would play Terry Bussey on the defensive side of the ball, but they also bring in Des Ricks via the transfer portal. And then they got some big bodies in front of them. Tristan Jernigan, the linebacker, Dalen Evans, the defensive lineman there in the middle. Look, last season, Texas A&M gave up 113 passes that went for 10-plus yards. That was the 3rd most in the SEC. You watch some of those games, it was big play after big play. Now they're refortifying it, and we think Mike Elko, how's he going to be different than Jimbo Fisher? Those guys are going to be coached up. The defense is what made Duke football what it was this past season. So I get excited about those additions. Ashton Bethel Roman, he was a guy that you thought he was headed to Arkansas. Now they're pairing him with Isaiah Williams, who was a wide receiver out of the state of Florida, finished in our top 247. Yeah, Evan Stewart's gone, but they've added some speed and some perimeter targets that can get deep.
Real quick, why defense over offense for Terry Bussey?
I'm a defensive guy, and his playmaking skills, we saw it at the Polynesian Bowl. He had an interception after practicing all week, primarily at wide receiver. Cooper, we also saw him in Orlando at the Under Armour All-American game, and your comment to me during warm-ups, all right, he's a little bit thicker than I thought. Initially, you're thinking developmental year or two, but he looks ready to go. Step into the SEC and play some type of role, whether that be on special teams. But Terry Bussey, man, easy kid to root for. Just having spent some time around him.
Big day for the Aggies this morning. Ashton Bethel Roman, Terry Bussey as well. They both ink and will be playing their football in College Station. Emily, back to you.
Thank you guys. Looking forward to their positional breakdowns throughout the afternoon. Hey, just a quick reminder, we are celebrating National Signing Day, but here at 24/7 Sports, it is National Signing Week. So if you are a fan of a team, you can check out a team breakdown right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube page. Let's show you the final team rankings of the 2024 recruiting cycle, starting with number 1. Guys, for the 16th straight season, the SEC has the number 1 class in Georgia, but we want to highlight number 2, Alabama. Some things have changed since the December signing window. Their 5-star quarterback, Julian Sayin, is now going to be playing for Ohio State. So, Huff, how differently do you evaluate this class from what it looked like in December?
Well, I think you look at who they were able to hold on to. Yes, losing Julian Sayin is a tough blow. When you have the number 1 quarterback in the country, a guy that obviously you wanted, that was going to be potentially a figure in your future, especially with the passing game that Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer were bringing to Tuscaloosa, that's a blow. But holding on to Ryan Williams when you knew that Auburn was going to make a late push for him, that was big. And let's not sleep on Noah Carter. This was a kid that we saw in San Antonio, was phenomenal, top 100 player. This is the kind of guy that you looked at when he was going to Washington and said, hey, this is a kid that could play in the SEC. You look at the frame, you look at the size, and then you have Xavier Brown, who, in my opinion, was the premier defensive player out west this year. Talking to the head coach at Sarah High School, Patrick Walsh, they played Mater Dei in the state championship game. He said that Mater Dei defense was the best collegiate or best high school defense he's seen, and that it was a college-like defense. Xavier Brown was a big reason for Mater Dei's success this year to win that state championship, be a national contender, and the kind of guy that can go in and play. Smoke, you know a little bit about those true freshmen that have gone to Alabama as true freshmen and played in the secondary, how tough that is. Xavier Brown is that kind of player that can go in there and be an early impact guy for the Tide.
Yeah, Alabama has 4 total 5-stars in this group. 3 of them play in the secondary. You see Nick Saban all over this class as his final class coming in to Alabama. The aforementioned Ohio State, they're sitting at number 5. They've got the number 1 player in the entire class in wide receiver Jeremiah Smith. Outside of him, looking at this class as a whole, what do you like, Smoke?
Well, when you look at it, they have impact players on both offense and defense. They got my guy down from Buford High School, Edric Houston, get after the quarterback. And then when you look at it from what we talked about in the secondary, right? Mr. West, he's staying out there and he's getting it locked up. But whenever you get the number 1 player in the class, overall, as an impact player, and then you get a quarterback with the ability to get it to him, and there's another guy named Mr. Graham saying, hey, listen, I'm over here too. I can catch the ball. You're putting together a class that's ready to start butting and start getting after and winning the national championship. We know offense wins games. Defense just keeps them out the end zone. So Ohio State, I like what they're doing as far as getting impact players on offense, explosive players on offense, but also getting those guys on defense to be difference makers, to get to the quarterback, but also get the ball back to the offense as well.
Let's show you teams 5 through 7. We first want to highlight LSU sitting at number 7 because, guys, 29 total commits. This is a massive class. 10 of those guys are in the top 247. What stands out about this group, Smoke?
Well, the first thing that you got to get into when you start to talk about recruiting is you have to win your state. And we understand the last few years LSU's been okay, but they haven't been winning it. This year, 9 of the top 10 players, they're staying home. Difference makers. They struggled back there in the secondary. They're doing a great job of getting athletic guys that can play both corner, safety, and guys that have length and growth potential to play linebacker to be erasers on the second level. And again, when you win at home and you can win your state, that's saying something else for the next class coming in order to win your state and also be one of the top teams in recruiting. If you don't win at home, you can't win abroad.
Yeah, overall, the Tigers have 18 commits from the state of Louisiana. That's actually tied for the most in the 24/7 Sports era, so certainly locking up those Louisiana borders. At number 8, Auburn. This is kind of the first full cycle we're seeing here for Hugh Freeze, and you can tell they got the number 1 player in the state of Alabama and wide receiver Cam Coleman. He was, of course, a flip from Texas A&M, and Alabama did offer him, so that is a huge win. What does that do for Hugh Freeze as he builds for the future?
I mean, it's huge. If you look at his track record at Ole Miss and the receivers that he signed there, whether it was Quan Treadwell, DK Metcalf, the history that he had of receivers, for him to come in his first full class, to be able to put this class together, do not ignore the ability of Cam Coleman. He's the number 5 overall player in the country in this class. He's the number 2 receiver. And I will say this, you talked about Jeremiah Smith, definitely the number 1 player. But the gap between Jeremiah Smith and Cam Coleman was not that large. Having seen Cam Coleman this spring and summer on the 7-on-7 circuit, you saw the size, the ability to catch the ball, that catch radius that he had. This is an impact player just as much as Jeremiah Smith, but then more importantly, there's a quarterback coming through. And that's one thing that Auburn has had uneven play it has been at quarterback. I mean, you really have to go back to Cam Newton to find consistency at quarterback. Yes, Bo Nix had his ups and downs. They had really uneven play there this year, but Walker White comes in with the expectation that, hey, this could be your job sooner rather than later, and he seemed to be up to the task, and he was already key in recruiting several of these receivers. That guy might be as much of an impact player as Cam Coleman was from a ranking standpoint. Long term for Hugh Freeze, Walker White may be just as crucial as Cam Coleman was.
Yeah, we talked earlier about Auburn hoping to get wide receiver Ryan Williams. Alabama able to keep him, but overall they have 11 players from the state of Alabama, which is absolutely massive. It's been since 2011 since we've seen that many players commit to Auburn from the state of Alabama. Let's continue to move down the list of the team rankings, showing you 11 through 20 here. We're going to start with 11 because, guys, we've been very positive and exciting on this show, but there's something, Smoke, that you would like to say about Clemson, and I got to ask in particular because Dabo's classes are made that much more important by the fact that he has limited use in the portal. So how do you evaluate this group, knowing that it is super important he hits on these guys?
Well, love my guy, Coach Sweeney, but the aspect of recruiting has changed. And I don't think he's grown or evolved in understanding what it is. We understand that at some point you have to pony up in this game of name, image, and likeness. And the less often that you want to do that, you're going to start struggling in terms of your recruiting class. Clemson's known to have top 5, top 10 recruiting classes. Being in 11, this ain't him. He's one of the best closers, but you can't close if you can't go to the bank to get that checkbook out. Usually he wins the state, he wins South Carolina. He's had one guy this year out of South Carolina. You've had more guys from Maryland in your signing class than you have from your home state. And like we said about LSU, you have to win your state to be considered as one of the top recruiters or top schools moving forward. You don't win your state, it's hard to win somewhere else. So, doesn't win in Birmingham, not winning in the state, struggling in Atlanta, refuses to dip inside of the collective pockets to get somebody. Disappointing being at 11. This is a top 5 recruiting type of program, top 10 at the worst. 11, they're pushing back.
On the positive side of things, though, you got 2 5-stars. Sammy Brown, who's #1 on Andrew Ivan's freaks list, so you hope that he comes in and can make an impact at the linebacker position. You've also got TJ Moore, who has absolutely shot up our rankings every time that we release them. So they do have some good pieces to work with, right?
Yes, they do, but at the end of the day, you're putting together a class. You're not putting together 2 players. You're putting together a stack of players that can play. And when you look at a class, you look at the middle group, because the middle group is the one that's going to push the top guys. The bottom third pushes the second level guys. Right now, they are bottom heavy. And being at the bottom, there's not a lot of guys in that middle group in order to push those top guys. So that's where you see the valley and the peaks of their program right now. They're down low. You need players to win. And right now, looking at this list, they have average guys, but this is not an average program.
All right, how about the national champion? Definitely not an average program there. Michigan coming in at #16. You have to assume that this class was signed with Harbaugh's status potentially up in the air. So what does Sharon Moore have to work with in this group?
Well, he's got some guys on the defensive line. He's got some guys on the offensive line. But Emily, I think you nailed it. This class was kind of in that will he or won't he be back type of thing. I mean, you look at that list that they had, they could have had Gatlin Bair up at the top. He was leaning towards Michigan, and it wasn't the departure of Harbaugh that really hurt Michigan. It was the departure of Ben Herbert with Harbaugh to Los Angeles that hurt him. They would have had a 5-star. So now you have the national champs with no 5-stars. But I think long-term, they're in a much better position because now they're not going to have to play the yearly game of where is Sharon Moore going to be? Is he going to be staying here as the offensive coordinator? Is he going to leave? Is Jim Harbaugh going to come back? They know it's now Moore's gig. And I think you're going to see that bump. Remember, by the time they won the national championship, the majority of the class was already signed. Even with the season that they had, their bump's going to really come in 25 and 26. So there's some players alike in this 2024 class, but I think you're really going to see them reap the benefits of this national championship in 2025 and beyond because there's now the stability at the head coach. They're coming off a national championship, and now they're showing that what they were building for has been reached with the national championship. Now they want to continue. It doesn't hurt that that school down south in Ohio, is making a big push and a concerted effort to pass Michigan. So that's going to raise Sharon Moore's expectations from the fans, and I think internally to make sure that Michigan stays on top from a recruiting standpoint as well.
Yes, those will be interesting battles. They always have been interesting battles. I think this is the first time in a long time, too, that Michigan's brought in a lot of players from the state of Ohio. It's definitely a recruiting ground that they like to take advantage of, but a couple guys in there this time around. Let's round out the top 30. Number 26, UNC. Smoke, this is a class that you wanted to highlight. Why?
I am a big believer in developing this product inside of your state. And when you look at what they're doing, they're not top heavy like other schools. They've hit the right amount of guys within their state. But when you look at their players, great development and upside. You see guys that in 2 or 3 years, it's like you said, not this year's class, but next year's class, they're going to use those guys in order to get stronger, bigger, faster. And Mac Brown figured a couple of years ago when he went too far into the top heavy class and not the bottom in the middle third to push those guys, that this is the right process for teams like North Carolina. Because again, when I talk about top heavy teams, you have 5 teams at the top that are always going to be able to go out and get whoever they want. Then there's the rest of us. That now you have to properly navigate what you have inside of your salary cap collective to get the right players within your program to get you to the 8 wins, 9 wins, and every now and then you get 10. And now we're going to a 12-win playoff system. North Carolina has positioned themselves with the right players, with the right staff, with the understanding of development along the way to get their program going in the right direction, because it's not going to happen too fast. It's going to happen at the right time.
And in the day and age of the transfer portal, we always talk about how do you balance how many players you bring in through high school versus the portal. This is a 27 signee class, so this is a big class for Mac Brown to work with. As always, you can check out the full rankings online at 247sports.com. You can find more analysis and, of course, those expanded rankings. But look, 60% off promo right now. You can get 60% off an annual subscription. It is only for today to celebrate National Signing Day, and the deal ends at midnight. Let's head over to our war room. Hey, guys.
Hey, Emily, thanks. Let's talk about some quarterbacks here, Drew, and there are a couple good ones, right? You can start with the 3 5-stars inside the top 32. DJ Lagway, Dylan Raiola, a little bit of musical chairs throughout the rankings process. You also got Julian Sayin, ends up early enrolling with Alabama, now at Ohio State under Ryan Day. And there's the list, 1 through 10, all included in the top 247. Drew, you were the person behind the scenes. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you got to wear it, right? These are the decisions you get paid to make. DJ Lagway, ultimately at the end of the day, continues to work his way up the board. The Florida signee ends up quarterback number 1 inside the top 5 for us. Why was he the guy at the end of the day that you felt comfortable saying, hey, let's bet it all, put all our chips in the middle of the table, let's ride with DJ Lagway?
Well, Coop, you just saw that pro comp up there. Anthony Richardson, right? Go back to last year's NFL draft, all the hype surrounding Anthony coming out of Florida. You know, you always bring up the one game he had against Utah. That had NFL scouts drooling over him. I think that it's going to be the same thing with DJ Lagway. This is a kid that coming into his senior season was just 10-10 on Friday nights. What does he do? He has one of the best senior seasons in recent memory there at Willis High School, leading his team to its best record in over 50 years. He sets the Texas 6A record for the most touchdown passes, and most importantly, he improved as a passer. The game slowed down for DJ Lagway. We liked him at the Elite 11 finals, right? That's a key quarterback evaluation for us. You get 20 of the top arms all in the same setting. Was DJ Lagway the best then? No. Was he the best as a senior? Maybe. Is he a finished product? No. But we like the upside with DJ Lagway. He's got an excellent athletic profile, could have played college baseball, dynamic as a runner, almost had 1,000 yards on the ground. I think he's exactly what Billy Napier and the Florida Gators need. That's why he finished QB1 for us, but it was close. There was a ton of back and forth.
I like the fact he's not a finished product. You mentioned that. Some people might view that as a negative, but you're talking about a guy from his sophomore to his senior season. He went from 55% as a sophomore, 67% as a junior, 72% as a senior. He's an ascending player. He's gotten better and better every year, and you talked about that. Guess what? That Elite 11 appearance there in Southern California, it wasn't the best. I think you and I kind of walked away from that kind of scratching our heads a little bit. But when it came time where the lights kind of shined the brightest on the field, Gatorade Player of the Year, this is a guy, as you mentioned, first time in 60 years, Willis High School had reached the semifinals. He's a guy you win because of, right? He's a needle mover at the end of the day. The other question Florida fans might ask, somebody like you and your expertise, how soon can this guy play? Because we're year 3 of Billy Napier, we're 11-14. This is the guy we're kind of pushing all our chips into the middle of the table. How soon can this guy make an impact in Gainesville?
How about week 1 against Miami? I think you create some packages for DJ Lagway. We saw it a little bit in the Under Armour All-America game. He got dinged up, hurt his ankle, but his ability to run the football is similar to what we've seen from a guy like Jalen Hurts or Anthony Richardson. He can beat you with his legs. He's a big 6'3", 230-pound individual. He can break tackles. Graham Mertz is coming back there in Gainesville, but they're going to need a spark. They need to find some offensive playmakers. Ricky Pearsall's out. Eugene Wilson, Trey Wilson, whatever you want to call him, he comes back. I think DJ Lagway, go back to when Florida had Chris Leak and Tim Tebow. Why can't it be Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway? And with the investment from Florida, I think there's going to be pressure on Billy Napier to get this kid involved right away.
Reminds me a little bit of Kansas State this past season. Avery Johnson, Will Howard, just too good of a talent to kind of keep off the field. We'll see what happens in Gainesville. Drew, some other really talented quarterbacks we talked about, especially in the top 32. Let's talk a little bit about Dylan Raiola. This was a guy who was in the pole position throughout the entire year, still finishes in the top 10. He ends up signing with Nebraska, was committed to Georgia, also Ohio State throughout his process. So moves to Georgia, plays at Beaufort, has a really good year, 34 touchdowns, 1 INT. What are you most excited about seeing him, his future in Lincoln under Matt Rule?
Well, Nebraska had one of the worst passing offenses in the country last year. What do they get? They get a quarterback with what we think is the best arm in the 2024 cycle. This is an NFL arm, right? You go out and you see him throw in person. It's like being on a driving range, right? He airs it out. He rips it to all different levels. Now he's going to Nebraska, and it's a situation where they are going to need some starts. They don't return much at quarterback. What I also like about his senior season is how he moved in the pocket in extended plays. Yes, there were some occasions where maybe he held onto the football a little too much, took some sacks that he probably shouldn't have. But at the end of the day, 250 pass attempts as a senior, just 1 interception. What also stands out about Raiola is how he processes and picks up offenses. You know, you said it, bounced around from high school to high school to high school. Buford High School there in Georgia, one of the top programs in the state, very pro-style offense. He had 6 weeks to learn it. I was there for his opener against St. Francis Academy. Full command of the huddle, rallied for a late win. I don't know if I would start him right away, but you're going to see him playing in 2024 because Nebraska needs him.
A quarterback's confidence it's a delicate thing, right? So I ask for Dylan Raiola to have the success that we think he can have when it comes to projecting this type of talent to Sundays. What does that look like for Nebraska? Because you mentioned it, I think they only got 11 starts coming back. There's a lot of expectations. Obviously, he is a legacy recruit. You mentioned the fact that his dad played there, All-American there. There's a lot of expectations surrounding this young man. So what do you think is the best path forward for Dylan Raiola when it comes to Matt Rule handling this very delicate situation in this era of the transfer portal and NIL, where there's a lot of expectations riding on the back of an 18-year-old freshman?
Well, Nebraska's got to figure out how to block out the outside noise, and that's going to be difficult to do because anytime you talk about the Cornhuskers moving forward, I mean, we're doing it here in February. Just wait till August, Cooper. I think they got Colorado week 3. It's going to be on College Game Day. It's going to be on Fox Big Noon Kickoff. Anytime you talk about Nebraska, Raiola is going to be talked about right after them because he's the first 5-star quarterback for the Cornhuskers in the modern recruiting era. So I think they need to keep him focused, simplify the offense. I don't know, take his phone away. He's a guy that, the outside noise, I think he can get a little distracted. The talent is not the question for us. It's between the ears, right? Can he buy in and believe in himself? There's going to be some lumps early on. There's going to be some adversity. He's got to stick to the plan and ride that thing out. I think that's going to be the biggest thing for him in 2024.
A lot of day one expectations for DJ Lagway in Gainesville, the same for Dylan Raiola in Lincoln. Another guy who might not have those day one expectations, probably a good thing. We talked about the ripple effects of Nick Saban stepping down, retiring after 17 seasons in Tuscaloosa. Well, one of those was a big ripple effect. How about 5-star Julian Sain, early enrollee at Alabama, ends up transferring to Ohio State. Now we got a very loaded room there. You throw in guys like Will Howard, Devin Brown, Lincoln Kidenholz, not to mention another top 100 player in Aaron Nolan. Drew, what do you think ultimately about the fit of Julian Sain in Columbus under a play caller like Ryan Day?
Well, Bill O'Brien is the reason why Julian Sain had initially committed to Alabama. Bill O'Brien, as it stands right now, is still the offensive coordinator there at Ohio State. I think what stands out about him is the ability to distribute the football and be accurate. Think about all the wide receivers there in Columbus. They had Jeremiah Smith, our #1 ranked wideout, a bunch of guys the previous cycle. They keep reloading at tight end. You can look at the 2025 cycle. Julian Sain, as a senior, 74% passer. He only lost one game. I watched the tape on that. He played good enough to win. You know, the other team went for 2 in overtime. Julian Sain never had a chance to extend his season. We had up there on the screen, you know, that player comp. We struggled, Cooper, behind the scenes to find a player comp. And I know Ohio State fans aren't going to like this one. I see some J.J. McCarthy in Julian Sain. He's a better athlete than he gets credit for. You know, he spins out of pressure, keeps plays alive. And when we saw him at the Elite 11 finals, did the ball touch the ground? You know, he puts it on his marks. I think Ohio State, that quarterback room, pairing him with Air Noland, another top 10 quarterback for us, they've quickly flipped the script there in Columbus.
Better be careful with that player comp, my friend. I like it, though. J.J. McCarthy kind of fits a little bit. That was a difficult one. I think a high-level distributor, you put him in an offense in an environment like Ohio State, all those playmakers, the way that Brian Hartline recruits that receiver position, that's the guy that I think that they've been missing to kind of keep them ahead of schedule. Drew, a lot of other talent out there outside of the top 32 as well. And let's start at the top. How about Luke Kromenhoek in Florida State? What an interesting story this is when you think about this young man out of the state of Georgia. This was a great early ID by Mike Norvell and his staff. You look at a guy like Kromenhoek and what he's been able to do over his career, 26-2, I believe, over the last 2 years as a starter at Benedictine Christian in Savannah. What do you like about him?
Cooper, the craziest thing to me about Luke is in the state playoffs, put on the game tape, and he's playing safety. I don't think there's any other quarterback that went both ways and was playing safety, running up in the box and hitting people. I think he is the perfect fit for what Mike Norvell wants to do. We saw it with Jordan Travis. The quarterback moves around a lot. They're going to get their playmakers involved. They're going to run the football. The fact that FSU offered Luke before he had started a high school game as a quarterback, I mean, this is like hitting the lottery ticket. Penn State tried to get involved. FSU fends off plenty of others. He is the quarterback of the future there in Tallahassee. They're going to have a bridge guy. You know, I wouldn't expect him to be the individual in 2024. Love the arm talent and that athletic frame, man. He can extend plays. He can be a guy you get involved in the designed run game.
Savvy scouting out of Tallahassee. Mike Norvell, got to give them a lot of credit. Drew, the other thing is, I think he can be quarterback too this year. Got to beat out Brock Lynn. Certainly struggled as a freshman. Was in a tough spot there without Jordan Travis. So Florida State in good hands. Let's talk about another guy that we're really excited about Walker White out of Little Rock, Arkansas. Huge get for Hugh Freeze and Auburn. All we talk about are these receivers. Who's going to be responsible for getting those guys the ball? How about Walker White, Drew? I love this chess piece for Hugh Freeze in their future.
He's another guy who was on my freaks list. Had a bunch of P90X when he was in high school. Look, we had a opening for the All-American Bowl. With the quarterbacks, a lot of guys had opted out, going to the bowl games. Me and you said Walker White's the first guy we wanted. And then day one of practices, Eric Richards, who was the director of recruiting for the All-American Bowl, he turned to me and said, okay, I get it. And that's after he saw Walker White rip it to the 10 to 15 yards. He can make some NFL throws right there. He's also a good athlete, can run around. I'm excited. Think about Hugh Freeze, Malik Willis, some of the quarterbacks he's had in the past. I think he can be the point guard in that offense and make plays when the Tigers need him to.
I know our boy Tom Loy is watching. Tom, if you're out there, appreciate you watching. He would be very upset if we did not talk about the cerebral assassin in the name of C.J. Carr going to play his football for Marcus Freeman in South Bend. What do you like about what Notre Dame's getting in this guy?
Love him between the ears. My favorite interview when we were at the Elite 11 finals, got to spend some time. He's just a pro's pro. Lloyd Carr's grandson, everyone thought he was going to Michigan, ends up at Notre Dame. You know, he put on the tape, isn't surrounded by the best talent. I think with C.J. Carr, the most impressive thing, the most impressive evaluations, my favorite footage for him came in the state playoffs when he was going up against other loaded teams, and C.J. Carr would find ways to get the job done. I think one of the top throws from him, he spins out, runs away from a sack, and delivers a dime. C.J. Carr, to me, he's got the tools. Reminds me a little bit of Davis Mills, who we saw make it to the NFL. So I think Marcus Freeman, what he has done with that quarterback room, whether it's the transfer portal or the high schoolers, it feels a lot different than when Brian Kelly was there.
Top 6 quarterbacks in the country, broken down by none other than the man himself, our director of scouting, Andrew Ivins. Back to Studio A.
We love it, guys. We're going to continue the discussion of quarterbacks and talk about QBs who could play this upcoming season. You might notice we did a little seat change here. Carl Reed is here with us, the coach, and I'm going to start with you. Who is a quarterback in this class you could see putting in some minutes this upcoming fall?
Well, I think we got to go with Nebraska's Dylan Raiola. He's definitely a guy that's going to come into the Cornhuskers and play right away. He's the prize of their recruiting class. Obviously, the lineage of being there, but he's the guy they wanted. Was committed to Georgia at one point. They got him to switch at the very end. The eyes of Nebraska are on Dylan. They are expecting him to be able to come in and turn that program around right away. I don't think it's any doubt that he's going to be the guy going in for the Cornhusker smoke day one.
It's a lot of family over there, right? Any daddy ball going on over there? You think this guy can come in as a young guy that's been to how many schools? Transferred?
I think three high schools.
4 high schools.
Four high schools. So when you tell me a guy is transferred 4 times to 4 different high schools, regardless of his skill set, mentality, what's going on with him? Why did he leave? And when you get on a team and you're supposed to be the guy, grab that bull by the head and run with it and go out there, and Cornhusker Nation is going to be going and say you're the guy. There's a little bit that I question in terms of his mental aptitude and his ability to get through adversity. Not saying that he can't, but this will be a good time for him to grow up.
Whether he went to 1, 4, or 10 high schools, he's Nebraska's guy. If you saw their quarterback play last year, it was very dismal. All the chips are on the table for him, and there's going to be a real high level of expectations there this season from him.
Yeah, I heard Andrew mention it. I mean, he's going to be a local hero. There's going to be pressure. There's going to be noise. He joked that he just take his phone away. But that is totally real from a freshman standpoint. Is that how much do you worry about that becoming a factor? Coming in as a Nebraska native and being kind of that savior.
No matter what the expectations are, a freshman is still going to have to go through growing pains. They still have a rebuild in the middle of a rebuilding process at the University of Nebraska. There's a lot of other pieces that they need before they are a super competitive football team. So there is going to be some growing pains that go along with it. But how he plays and Matt Rule's tenure is going to be tied directly together. But he is going to be the guy that they go with.
Speaking of the guy, Smoke, you think the #1 quarterback in this class, DJ Lagway, will be the guy year 1 for Florida. There's 2 things going here, right? There's opportunity and then there's readiness. How ready is he to come in and be a starter?
I don't know if he's ready because there aren't many freshmen that come in, especially at the quarterback position, saying I'm ready day 1 to come in and handle 10 other guys in the huddle and take this whole university on my back and run with it. But what he is an athletic quarterback that when plays break down, he can get it done. Right? So when you have a dual threat quarterback, you don't necessarily have to have scripted plays for him. You just say, hey, listen, here goes the ball. There's one read right there. The second read is on your legs. Go get it. And when you're at Florida and you haven't made a bowl game in 2 years, this is Florida. This is the swamp. National championships is what you go there to win. And if when you're a coach, that's the expectation. You haven't won 6 games. There's something called hope. This young man gives Florida hope. They have a game manager right now that's there. But with a game manager, what do you need? Playmakers. They don't have a lot of playmakers. This kid here is a playmaker with the ball in his hands. And there are 1 or 2 guys that he can run around in a couple of seconds, get the ball to him, and he can score. But this guy gives Florida the best chance in order to get back to +6 wins.
And with DJ Lagway, he's going to be in a similar situation Raiola was in. You need improvement from the quarterback position. And he's going to bring that to the table. He's poised as a dual threat guy. You can do a lot of things in the passing game with him, but the running game with him as well, including read option, power read, run scheme kind of things, when you are limited in some of the other skill spots. The Florida Gators are a long way away from competing for national championships, but they need him to play very, very well to get them going back in the right direction on the winning side of things.
Yeah, both of those guys will be facing a lot of pressure, but hey, 74 total touchdowns as a senior. DJ Lagway, he's got it. He's got it in him.
He can score.
He can score. We know he can reach the end zone. I'm sure the Gators are hoping to see that a lot this fall. Let's talk about some maybe off the radar kind of guys. A name that you might not think of, but based on that opportunity could play right away. What do you think?
Well, I think that when you look at Ohio State and this football team, the transfer class they put together, the recruiting class they put together, and it was a lot when Kyle McCord left and they started jumping in the transfer portal, going after guys, and they ended up settling on Will Howard from Kansas State. I think you got to look at Aaron Nolan. Aaron Nolan was Ryan Day's guy. And regardless of what anybody thinks in terms of how the season ended in Ohio State, losing to the University of Michigan and how that upset the fan base, Ryan Day is one of the best quarterback coaches and evaluators of quarterback play in the country. And Aaron Nolan is the guy he picked. He is only the sixth five-star quarterback in school history to sign with Ohio State. He has the goods. He can throw. He's athletic. He makes incredible decisions, a very live arm. Do not be surprised if he comes in and pushes the issue and really competes hard for Ohio State this season.
Okay, but I know this is National Signing Day. We have to take into account what Ohio State has done in the portal. Technically, bringing in Julian Sayin through the transfer portal. You also have Will Howard, and then you talk about prolific quarterbacks that they already have on that roster. Devin Brown was competing for Kyle McCord last season to be the starter. So where's I have trouble finding the opportunity there at Ohio State. I mean, we believe in him as a quarterback.
I think the bowl game kind of solidified what's going to happen with Devin Brown. So I would look at the competition being between him and Will Howard in terms of the guy who transferred in from Kansas State. Also, Ryan Day taking a different role and not being the play caller itself. So you're going to have an offensive coordinator that's coming in looking at what could possibly be a blank canvas. Now, I'm hearing that Bill O'Brien is going to probably be named the head coach at Boston College. And so if that happens, then that's going to kind of turn what could happen offensively. So in terms of having a fair opportunity for him to compete, you're talking about a five-star and one of the best guys in the nation there.
Yeah. And if that does happen, if Bill O'Brien does leave, I know that was a big reason that Julian Sayin came in because he recruited him at Alabama. Smoke, would you like to add anything before we go to your guy?
Man, I used to call you short arms. That was a long reach. That's a long one. So he has to beat out
Why?
the third string quarterback that's there now, the transfer that's coming in, and also the other transfer that's coming in. So if you put him on a depth chart right now, he's fourth. Former coach, you tell me from the spring to the beginning of the season, I don't know, when are they going to have him come in the fifth or sixth game? Where does he get the practice reps from, and how does he earn the opportunity to start at The Ohio State?
Well, number one, he's coming in already as one of the most talented guys in the room. He arguably is going to be the most physically gifted guy that comes in the room. And I would tell you, Smoke, you looking at it from a conventional wisdom standpoint in numbers. But I love coming back on this show in the season and telling people I told you so. I love to do it.
Okay, well, we want to give Smoke the opportunity to do that as well. So real quick, Smoke, who is an off-the-radar guy that you could see playing some valuable minutes this fall?
Well, I'm not going to reach that far. I'm going to go to a team that, when you look at the quarterback position, and I'm talking about South Carolina and Dante Reno, they don't have one. They got a guy that transferred in from Auburn, Robbie Ashford, a guy that dual-threat quarterback, and this is his second opportunity to get it right. Mm-hmm. Dante Reno comes from a family of coaches. Dad's a coach. Been to two schools, but the reason why is he's really, really intelligent. He plays his game from the shoulders up. He's enrolled, doesn't have that many guys in front of him. They're going to struggle early. Mm-hmm. And when you struggle, there's an opportunity now to come in and play. And that's where I see that guy coming in. Not off the national championship carousel of Ohio State that you got running right now, and a guy coming in to rescue something that don't need to be rescued. This young man needs to rescue Shane Beamer's career and give South Carolina a jolt of hope into that university in order to get Shane that second contract that he's looking for.
Can a guy, a three-star guy in terms of what we rank them, coming from playing high school football in Connecticut, which is not an incredibly high level of high school football, coming to the SEC, the best conference in the country, and lead them to a bowl game?
Well, back in 1999, there was a young guy from Paint Branch High School. Just started playing football in the 9th grade. Showed up to the University of Alabama. 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, buried on the depth chart. Mm-hmm. By the end of the year, he was starting corner on an SEC championship team. So yes, that can happen.
Smoke, in 1999, you had a high top fade like Kid and Play, and we were riding down the street listening to 8 Ball and MJG.
Down ball.
It doesn't matter.
Something tells me that we're going to continue this debate, even though we're going to toss it over to our war room for more positional breakdowns, guys.
That's a heck of a debate. I would have loved to see that fade, Smoke. We're going to have to go back in the yearbook, take a look at that. Drew, one of the most underappreciated positions out there. How about the running back position? Everybody needs them, right? It's been devalued, especially at the NFL level, at the collegiate level. These guys have a tendency to play pretty early, and we got some immediate impact type of players that we're going to talk about. Let's start with a guy that you were very excited about. We're talking about it this morning. We're putting this list together. How about Caden Durham going to LSU?
Yeah, Caden Durham, he's playing his best football right now. His final 5 games at Duncanville High School there in Texas averaged close to 225 yards on the ground. We saw him in the Polynesian Bowl, led that all-star game in rushing yards. I thought he should have been offensive MVP. He wasn't. It went to Mike Matthews, the wide receiver headed to Tennessee. But Caden Durham, he can go. Once he finds a crease in a defense, he can find the end zone. And Cooper, I know you're well-versed on the LSU roster. There's an opportunity for him to get on the field. They want to throw it around the yard, but there's a need at running back for LSU. Caden Durham seems like a guy.
Logan Diggs comes over from Notre Dame. He hits a portal. Now he's at Ole Miss. Noah Cain is out of there as well. They still got a really talented room with guys like Caleb Jackson, Trey Holly. They expect some things from. But you think about LSU, the dynamic of them. Jaden Daniels is not there anymore. The Heisman Trophy winner. You take away his legs, LSU traditionally is going to have to get back to the ground, so it's going to be interesting. I think Caleb Durham can make an early impact. Drew, how about our guy here, Dylan Jones, Wisconsin, got a wrestling background. His head coach has got a wrestling background too, Luke Fickell. But you talk about patience, vision, a guy with contact balance, being able to kind of bounce around and create yards after contact. Man, is that Dylan Jones. I love this guy. I know you're a big fan of him as well.
Yeah, Wisconsin took 3 running backs, and they need to because they're losing a ton of production. You think about the Badgers, Phil Longo there, air raid offense. Well, Cooper, they still ran for 161 yards per game. That was 6th in the Big Ten. Dylan Jones fits Big Ten football for me. This is a guy that can get it done between the tackles. Had a chance to see him back in May at that Under Armour camp in Baltimore. It was loaded with the mid-skill position. Dylan Jones was my favorite. I think we are an outlier on him in the industry. And you talk with some people there that cover Wisconsin, they don't even think Dylan Jones is the top back. But this is a guy we stamp, right? We think he's going to come in and play right away, especially with Brandon Allen off to the NFL. Big fan of Dylan Jones.
Are we just Wisconsin guys? I mean, you think about this class, right? What, the highest ranked recruiting class since 2010, the 24/7 Sports era. We're going to talk about Wisconsin a little bit later in the show, but I love this fit. If you haven't noticed, you're out there right now and you're kind of wondering, all right, who are those deceptive teams? We talk a lot about the teams in the top 10. What about those teams kind of 20 to 25? We're talking about it later on the show. Wisconsin's one of those teams, and Luke Fickell, he's got a track record, especially when it comes to development, that position as well. How about Florida, Drew? Kanan Daniels, this kid out of Mississippi, late riser for us, back-to-back 2,000-yard seasons. You think about all he can do. Trevor Etienne, he jumps in the portal. Where's he going? Well, he's going to Georgia, right? So you think about guys like Montrell Johnson, Trayon Webb. You throw in a guy like Caden Daniels, Jabbar Jalouk, the running back coach over there. He's got to be pretty excited about what this kid can provide from day one in Gainesville.
Yeah, turn on the tape from that Mississippi 5A state title game. 28 carries, 253 yards, 3 touchdowns. He had another, 400-yard performance earlier in the season. Tons of Florida fans tagging us in that. Billy Napier likes to play multiple running backs. I watch a lot of Florida football. Trayon Webb is a guy we liked in the 2023 cycle. He got his feet wet. I think Caden Daniels can come in and be the dude behind Montrell Johnson and allow things to open up for Graham Mertz and potentially DJ Lagway. So another running back where you think about who's he similar to? Kind of like a CJ Baxter last cycle, a Mark Fletcher. These big frame running backs. We saw CJ Baxter help Texas make the college football playoff. Mark Fletcher got a ton of run at Miami. I could see a similar type of role for Caden Daniels there in Gainesville.
A lot of big things to expect from Caden Daniels. I'm going to off-road a little bit. Another guy that I know you're familiar with. How about the All-American Bowl? You look up and you say, who is that guy? Every day at practice, in the game as well. How about Nate Frazier going to Georgia, man? They just keep him coming. I don't know about the immediate impact because that's a loaded room and a lot of talent, but this dude, they go all the way out to California to nab a guy like this. Drew, I think this is going to be a guy we look up from 2 to 3 years from now. Saturday, SEC football, this is going to be a name to know.
Best part about those all-star games, right, is you get to see all these different individuals in the same type of setting. Showed up in San Antonio. I saw Nate Frazier run one route. I'm like, who is that? Because I didn't have the roster in front of me. He just moves different than others. He's got that burst. Fast forward to the game, caught that wheel route for a long touchdown. I agree. Georgia, their identity on offense is running the football behind a really, really, really big offensive line. They've brought in multiple backs. I think Nate Frazier could be a featured ball carrier, a potential workhorse for the Bulldogs at some point down the line. Yeah, I absolutely loved him. He's dealt with some injuries. Guy that was still on my freaks list. Just kind of a ball of muscle. We saw him in the hotel there at the All-American Bowl. Excited to see what he's going to do in Athens.
A couple SEC programs, Dylan Jones as well with Wisconsin, Immediate impact players, running back position. There you have it. Andrew Ivins breaking it all down. We'll send it back to Studio A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Coop. We're going to do some Big 10 superlatives with our special guest, Alan True. I believe that he is here. We don't have Alan True yet. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and move on with talking about some big coaching moves that are happening in the world of college football, guys, because Nick Saban retires, and what happens? 6 FBS coaching jobs all of a sudden become available. Absolutely nuts. A late coaching cycle that we saw, because all of that went down in January. Let's start with what happened at Alabama, though. You saw some attrition, but ultimately they were able to come in, kind of steer the ship a little bit with Kalen DeBoer, but overall, how do you evaluate his ability to kind of stabilize what was already a very good class he had to work with?
Well, it would have been a lot more stable had Julian Sand not put his name in the portal. That was the crown jewel of their offensive recruiting in December. But holding on to Ryan Williams obviously was big. Holding on to Xavier Brown, who they had recruited some when they were at Washington, even though it was a new defensive staff. Holding on to him was big. If you look at that secondary, that's been a staple under Nick Saban. It's been outstanding defensive backs. But then to be able to come in and get a Noah Carter to flip from Washington to Alabama was big. Daniel Hill, a running back in a game where you need to have running backs. Alabama has always had running backs, so to hold on to it, I think they did a really good job staying it, but it's going to be left wanting just a bit because Julian Salen is no longer in Tuscaloosa.
The staff has a lot to do with the stability, right, Smoke?
1,000%. When that earthquake went off in Tuscaloosa and everybody felt it in the world, we all know we had to get a stabilizer, right?
Yeah.
The stabilizer is Nick. He's still in the building. Right. If Nick's around, the Saban Nation is still around. And that's why you keep Freddie Roach on staff, one of the better recruiters that they have, stabilize it. You keep Robert Gillespie, that held a lot of that class together. And you don't have the mass chaos that we've seen in other places. You lose one, but you also get one back. Like, you lose one in the portal, you get 5 back in return. The portal taketh, the portal giveth away. That's just a part of the game that we're playing now in the recruiting world.
Well, and if you look at Austin Mack, Austin Mack did reclassify into the class of 2023. He's the same grade as Julian Sand. He would have been a senior in the top 20 in the 2024 class, would have been a top 10 quarterback. They get Mack to follow them to Tuscaloosa, so that's big. It's probably lost because you have Julian Sand in, you then lose him, and then Austin Mack comes via the portal. But if we're looking at in terms of experience and development, there's a lot of reason to like Austin Mack. He really only spent 1 year as a starter at Folsom High School. Now he goes with a system he's already familiar with to Tuscaloosa. So yes, you have Jalen Milroe back. You have some other players that are there, but you've got a young, exciting quarterback with a big, bright future ahead of you to be excited about that maybe calms a little bit of the fears losing Julian Sand.
Well, the devil's always in knowing.
Yeah.
And knowing what you have already in Austin Mack, you're okay. You know he can operate within your offense. And he's shown you things for a year that they've had him. I think they'll be perfectly fine down there in Tuscaloosa. We all still have to remember, this is still Alabama.
Yeah.
They'll be all right.
Yes. Alabama lost 10 players to the transfer portal, but brought in 3, one of them being Austin Mack, who was actually Kalen DeBoer's highest ranked commit while at Washington, which transitions us to what happens now with the Huskies. And you want to talk about attrition. It's not just the transfer portal for the Huskies. A lot of these guys off to the NFL. They lost their entire starting offense that we saw play in the national championship game. Huff, what kind of uphill climb does Fish now face?
Well, he went heavy into the portal. He brought a few players from Arizona. It probably could have been even more exciting had Noah Fafita and Tatori McMillan followed him from Tucson to Seattle. That didn't happen, but He was able to get Jonah Coleman at running back, Ephesians Prysock in the secondary. More importantly, they were able to hold on to Will Rogers, who had transferred up there in the offseason, or in between December and the championship game. He was actually seen on the sidelines at the national championship game warming up with the Washington jersey. Well, a few days later, when Kalen DeBoer leaves for Alabama, Rogers puts his name in the portal, but then takes his name out of the portal. So with Washington holding on to Marcus Davis, who was a 4-star quarterback that put his name in the portal but decided to stay, and then Damon Williams, who was committed to Fish and signed with him at Arizona, transferring to Seattle. You don't want to throw true freshmen in because their backup quarterback, Dylan Morris, he took a grad transfer to James Madison. We've already talked about Mac leaving Washington to go to Alabama. What was life going to be like without Michael Penix? Well, they didn't have receivers to throw the ball to, let alone a quarterback. So holding on to Will Rogers is huge. But you're going to need to see a ramped up effort from Washington recruiting. Even before DeBoer left, for a team playing for a national championship, this wasn't a class that you would have said, hey, this is a team that's gone 24-3 the last 2 years. There needed to be a concerted effort with high school recruiting. They were playing the portal game. They had a lot of seniors this year. They had a lot of draft eligible guys. The majority of their offense is going to the NFL. A couple followed DeBoer to Tuscaloosa, but the majority of that team is going to be needed to be backfilled by younger guys. So they've got to make a better effort with high school guys, and you're already seeing how aggressive they have. Triple-digit offers out to the 2025 class. I think 70 plus in the 2026 class. Already in the 3 weeks that he's been there, Jedd Fisch is making a renewed effort with recruiting, and I think that's something that they're going to have to continue to do moving forward and not just rely on the portal.
I know there's that extra emphasis in the beginning to kind of ramp it up and to offer as many guys as possible, especially when you go through that later coaching change happening in late January. But moving forward, Smoke, what do you anticipate kind of the philosophical shift that we'll see recruiting-wise from Kalen DeBoer to Jedd Fisch?
Well, you're going to see the approach you can't be offering 5 to get 2. You're going to have to go out there and just cast that wide net. Where you're at, football is solid, not great. You have to nationally recruit. And when you nationally recruit from my old chair, the general manager at Maryland, you have to send out a whole lot of signals to get a few. Mm-hmm. And this is the grenade effect. He's going to have to throw that grenade in there, blow it up, and get a lot. So offer a lot to get as many as you need. But he's going to have to be more aggressive. Can't be as deliberate as Coach was before there, where he could sit there and pick and choose who he wanted. Those days are over. You got to go get them all. Offer them all, get a few.
Meanwhile, Arizona lost their coach in Jedd Fisch. Brent Brennan coming in from San Jose State. This is a group ranked 60th, so not super high in terms of their recruiting rankings, but they did lose 2 of their highest rated players. So Smoke, who does Brennan have to work with in this class? The sigh says it all.
Man, Mr. Williams.
Yeah.
Right? And again, when you look at Arizona's not a super hotbed. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a total rebuild, in your opinion, where you have to start back over from scratch and start infusing a lot of energy into that recruiting department. And the way that college football is built right now, we spoke about it the other day on the show, I don't think there's a lot of emphasis on the personnel department. And when you have turnover such as Arizona, where it's not a hotbed in terms of recruiting and losing your entire class that's moving along with your coach with better opportunities, and we all have that issue of doing that, getting a personnel department to put a lot of structure to this and give the word that we used earlier, stabilizer. Arizona does not have a stabilizer right now. So right now they're out fishing, not a lot of hooks out there, and I don't know if they're catching a lot of bait.
No pun intended without fishing, because they are without fish. But if you're an Arizona fan, here's why you need to be optimistic. We've watched what Brent Brennan did. You want to talk about a total rebuild. When he took over at San Jose State, they were dealing with some of the worst facilities they're going to find at the FBS level. Mm-hmm. They were able to, and you would think for a school that's in Silicon Valley, they would have resources they wouldn't know what to do with, but that wasn't the case. They had to spend the COVID year playing in Las Vegas for half of that season, couldn't even practice in their own backyard. They were in contention for the Mountain West Championship multiple times, won it once, were tied for it this year, got left out by a tiebreaker. What Brent Brennan did at San Jose State was fantastic. But more importantly, he made San Jose State a factor with recruits, not just in Northern California, but in the whole state and really out west. Now he brings a big chunk of that staff with him to Tucson, most notably Alonzo Carter, who we've all been big fans of. I thought Alonzo Carter could be in contention for the head coaching job. That guy was super connected in the Bay Area, and he still is from his time as a high school and JUCO coach. So that effort that Brent Brennan was bringing to San Jose State, he's going to bring it to Arizona. They're going to the Big 12. Like you said, Smoke, they don't have the fertile recruiting ground, especially when you look at what UCF has, the Texas schools have. Arizona, the kids in Arizona have consistently left the state to play. Arizona looked like they might get an Elijah Rushing. They had a Damon Williams, but those are more often the exceptions rather than the rule. So Brent Brennan knows what he needs to do, and that's to really focus in-state, but then he's got his California ties. He went to UCLA. He grew up in the Bay Area. They're going to tap into California, but they're also going to go into Texas. And I think that Arizona has reason for optimism because we saw what Jedd Fisch took over when Kevin Sumlin was fired in 2020 to where he built that. I have no doubt that Brent Brennan is going to be able to do the same thing.
So you're saying put a fence around the state and put 4-hour radius around it and go capture as many as you possibly can.
Knowing that Arizona State's going to be doing the exact same thing. So you got to match Arizona State. And remember, the majority of that talent is in the Phoenix area, not the Tucson area. But it's one of those things where Brent Brennan knows, hey, when I'm at San Jose State, I had to recruit against Cal, I had to recruit against Fresno State and San Diego State. He's up for the challenge.
Expectations are alarming. Hopefully he'll get it.
Yes, again, coming in very late in the cycle, so there's only so much that you can take from this. It just hurts a little bit more when you see what's happening in the transfer portal. Let's tell you what's coming up on the show with some of the headlines that we have seen today in the world of college sports. Terry Bussey officially putting pen to paper. All Aggies fans out there sighing some relief. The 5-star athlete, the #1 athlete in the class, signing with Texas A&M this morning. And there was more good news for the Aggies as the top 247 wide receiver Ashton Bethel-Roman signing with Texas A&M today. He originally signed with Arkansas. That was back in December, but was released from his NLI smoke. Real quick, what kind of player are the Aggies getting here?
Well, like I said, great pedigree. Pops is a former second-round draft pick for the San Francisco 49ers, Mark Roman. His coach, phenomenal guy, was my GA at Alabama. Rick LaFavors, the first question I asked him, I said, just give me one word to describe this guy. He said, dude. Flat out dude. And now you cut on the tape and you study him, you can see the speed. He's a 21.5 200-meter runner. Catch radius, long arms, sticky hands. They're like Velcro when they stick to his hands. And then he has a subtle way of getting in and out of his breaks. And then when you see him put the second foot in the ground, he accelerates and gets to top speed. But you're like, man, he doesn't look that fast. But everybody else is in rewind, and he's in super fast forward. Playmaker, ball catching ability, and a huge catch radius.
2 big wins for Texas A&M today. Meanwhile, the #8 player in the class, wide receiver Ryan Williams, well, he and then recommitted to Alabama, and he is officially a member of the Crimson Tide. The #1 player in Louisiana, defensive lineman Dominic McKinley signing with LSU, and then wide receiver Gatlin Bear signing with Oregon. Huff, you think that Ryan Williams, top 10 player in this class, could make an impact in year 1. Why is that?
I think it's because of the talent that he brings. Obviously, Alabama's need for that game breaker receiver. Remember 2-3 years ago, they had Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy and Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith. They have not had that elite type of playmaker, save Jamison Williams, in the last couple of years. And Williams is this type of player, Ryan Williams that is this type of player. And Jamarcus Shepard will not be afraid to play young receivers if he's got him. When he had him at Washington, he played a few of them. Jeremy Bernard saw time right away this year. Yes, they had some veteran receivers, but at Alabama, a game breaker like a Ryan Williams becomes huge. And he's the kind of player that can make an early impact for the Tide.
Okay, it is not National Signing Day without a live commitment. This guy, Seattle native Rahshawn Clark, is set to commit with us live on this show in just a bit. As you'll remember, he signed with Arizona in December after flipping late from Cal. Now Washington is in the mix. Huff, who is the favorite in this race?
I'd like the Huskies to keep the hometown kid home. Would be the first player in this class from the state of Washington to sign with the Huskies, and it could come as a result of hiring Jedd Fisch. Otherwise, they were going to go 0 for the state. But Rahshawn Clark, one of the most versatile players, originally committed to Cal. He wanted to play receiver, signed with Arizona. They were going to play him at cornerback. He's being recruited as a defensive back by Washington. I think that's where he ultimately ends up. But we'll know for sure today if he sticks with Arizona or if he's going to stay home.
One of those coaching moves affecting things on this signing day. Another live commitment on today's show, one of the top prospects out of Arizona, defensive lineman Keona Wilhite. Now, he originally signed with Washington, got out of his NLI after Kalen DeBoer left, took a few visits, but 4 crystal balls are in for him to land at Nebraska, including one from the man sitting next to me. So tell us, why are the Huskers the favorite here?
I think it was the stability with the Nebraska program, with Matt Rule being in his second year, heading into his second year, defense coordinator Tony White, who was a candidate for other defensive coordinator jobs and even some head coaching jobs, his kind of restructured contact to stay long term. And with Wilhite, he was committed to Arizona, flipped to Washington. Jedd Fisch leaves Arizona, goes to Washington. For whatever reason, he's not going to play for Jedd Fisch, and so he decommitted from Washington, got out of his NLI, and it's down to essentially Nebraska and UCLA. There was a lot of buzz for the Bruins, but then the rumors started popping up that Chip Kelly was interviewing for offensive coordinator positions. I think that moved the Huskers back to the forefront for him.
Okay, so those are the headlines on this National Signing Day. As promised, we are answering your questions. Let's start with one here from Tyler. He wants to know, Smoke, hypothetically, if I am a top 15 program, how much do I need to spend on NIL in order to ensure that I am in contention for a national title?
I'm going to tell you between $5 to $10 million.
Okay.
Just because really you need 53 players on your team. Your quarterback's going to cost you between $600 to $1 million. And the rest, you divvy it up to your players that are already on your current team because you got to retain your players. And the rest of it's to recruit. So about $5 to $10 million, you settle at 5 being the low end. The upper echelon guys will have about 10. Without that, you're hustling backwards because you're not going to be able to afford what you need.
Yeah, it's safe to assume it's different from school to school. One school might have to spend a little bit more than another school. So that $5 to $10 million range is where they're in.
Bottom end 5, top end 10.
Okay. We got a question here for Huff. Any non-Power 5 conference teams have a recruiting class that you really like?
Yeah, I really like what Boise State has done. And, speaking of coaching changes, that one was kind of off the grid a little bit with Andy Avalos being fired in November at his alma mater in year 3. And then Spencer Danielson, like me, a fellow Zeus Pacific Cougar, was promoted from the defensive coordinator job to the head coaching job, won the Mountain West. They go to the Los Angeles Bowl. Yes, they lost Gatlin Bair, which would have been the biggest recruit in the history of the Mountain West, let alone Boise State, the highest rated player ever. But Clay Martineau, a 4-star linebacker out of Oregon that they got a commitment from back in the summer, had plenty of Pac-12 schools or former Pac-12 schools recruiting him during the fall. He stuck with it. I like what Boise State's done along the defensive line. Trevor McKenna is one of them, an in-state kid that they've gotten. And then you can't ignore what they did in the portal. Malachi Nelson, with all the suitors that he had, the former 5-star to USC, decides that he wants to go to Boise State. I anticipate he's going to be an instant impact guy for the Broncos. They did lose their starting quarterback to the transfer portal, but they were able to hold on to Ashton Gianti. I like what Spencer Danielson has done, and if you talk to a lot of the recruits that committed to Boise State early on, they would mention Spencer Danielson as being a big part of it. So the players wanted him, a lot of the former players wanted to keep him, and the recruits certainly wanted him to be retained and promoted to the head coaching job. He was, and now I think Boise State is positioned to have, again, the best Mountain West recruiting classes in the foreseeable future.
We'll see if it translates into a Mountain West title. We got one more bonus question here. Huff, Colin wants to know, what are you wearing on your lapel?
Well, if you look at my lapel right here, I've got a pink and green ribbon, and that is in honor of my daughter Avery, who passed away from brain cancer in 2016 on February 16th, 8 years ago. And you see it on the sticker on my computer as well. It says Avery Strong. And I don't get very emotional very often talking about it, but it's a time of year where I do, and it's to honor my daughter's bravery and her fight against brain cancer. She was diagnosed when she was 6.5, fought it bravely for 7.5 months, and succumbed to it in February 2016. And my wife and I started a foundation, the Avery Huffman DIPG Foundation, in her honor. And we've raised over $1 million for research for brain cancer, supporting hospitals throughout the world. Her tumor was donated to a number of hospitals around the world and has been making big strides in the fight against brain cancer. So thanks for asking that question, Colin, and allowing me to talk about my hero.
It's absolutely amazing. Yeah,
Heck of a job.
I know. That is amazing what you have done. You can find out way more information about this online. You guys have a Twitter, you have an Instagram account, hashtag Avery Strong. You see it right there. All right, on that note, we're going to send it over to our war room for more breakdowns. Hey, guys.
Thank you, Emily. We love you, Huff. Proud of you, man. Drew, let's talk about these pass catchers, man. There's a lot of them. You got, what, 7 in the top 32, right? You think about the NFL draft, that's what we model it after. You can go a lot of different ways here, but we got to talk about tight ends as well. There's only one of those guys that are ranked inside the top 32 as a 5-star in that status. Well, let's start with the Freaky Four. That's what the boys are calling it. That's what we came up with. Luke Reynolds, Oyster Boy OG. If you don't know what that is, this guy can play a little bit of football. Trey As Green, Carter Nelson, Christian Bentancur. But let's start with the guy with a beautiful head of hair. This guy going to be making plays at State College for a long time coming.
Cooper, he tested off the charts, and really he turned our heads at the Elite 11 Finals quarterback event. Luke Reynolds caught more passes than anyone. He might have had 100 receptions over the 3-day tournament that was designed for quarterbacks. What stood out to us about Luke Reynolds, why he finished inside the 32, as a senior, he played defense. He was a safety, a 6'4" safety, and that to us signals, all right, this guy can be an inline blocker. You think about some of the tight ends that have come out of Penn State over the years. I think Luke Reynolds is the next great one to suit up for the Nittany Lions. Love me some Luke Reynolds. I love all these guys. You said it, Freaky Four, all of them, multi-sport athletes. Why is that important? 16 tight ends drafted last year in the NFL draft. All 16 of them played other sports in high school and at a high level. I'm talking about Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid. Those guys were good basketball players. Trey'Dez Green, you want to go there with Trey'Dez Green? Could have played Division I college basketball. He's headed to LSU. Our guy, Gabe Brooks, who does he compare him to? Plaxico Burress, that big perimeter target. He had an excellent senior season there. And I think he's another weapon for the Tigers.
Yeah, you think about Trey'Dez Green, the basketball background. You talked about a guy we didn't really have a lot of data on, right? We love the multi-sport context. He transfers to Zachary High School, Louisiana as a senior, and this is a guy who just absolutely balled out. You talk about a mismatch nightmare. LSU going to be able to kind of get him involved early. I think Kamarian Penton, another name, you think about that. Both those guys, very similar backgrounds, right? I want to go back to Luke Reynolds for a second because this is a guy we had in the top 32 for a while. He kind of had this meteoric rise within our rankings, and I think a lot of people were like, where'd this guy come from? Well, for us, we saw the testing data. It was a 4.56 40. It was a 4.2 shuttle and then a 38-inch vertical, and then you see the senior tape, right, out of Connecticut, and you better be like, listen, if you're playing football in Connecticut, you better do a little bit of everything. He dominated, right? So you feel really good about the box checker that Luke Reynolds is. I feel really good about the fit there as well. Trey'Dez Green heading to Baton Rouge. Drew, number 3. How about our man here, Carter Nelson, 8-man football? You want to talk about a guy that does a little bit of everything. This guy reminds me of Nikola Jokic on the basketball court. Maybe that's a little bit of Rich, the Joker. But, I mean, you watch the highlights. It's hard to take a lot from 8-man football, but like I said, with playing football in Connecticut, you better be able to do everything. Well, you better be almost an Olympian-level athlete if you play 8-man football and are going to be ranked inside the top 50. Drew, he's not that far away from that, in my opinion, Carter Nelson.
And we got him at the All-American Bowl. We didn't know how he was going to adjust, seeing as he hadn't been in an 11-on-11 setting. I thought it took a few days. He got adjusted, and then he flew out to Hawaii for the Polynesian Bowl in the game, catching passes from Dylan Raiola. I'm like, this is the Carter Nelson I thought he could be. Comes from a town with one stoplight. I think that, there's not a lot of people there. I think what stands out about Carter Nelson is Chris Hummer, great story. He wrote on 247sports.com, just kind of profiling it. What the vision for Matt Rule and the Cornhuskers, they're going to get this guy involved. He also points out, 300-yard drive with a golf ball straight.
Like that a lot.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of jealous there, but might be the heaviest pole vaulter. Can we also talk about Christian Bittenker? This is my guy. Headed to Clemson. Broke a ton of records there in Illinois. Final prep game, 21 catches. We saw him, too, in the All-American Bowl. We saw him out at the Polynesian Bowl. You think about Clemson not using the transfer portal, but Dabo Swinney likes to use his tight ends. I think Christian Bittenker, All-State honorable mention in basketball. That is important. Again, we talked about Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid. I think he could play relatively early. Someone we didn't have a ton of verified data on, and then he was a box checker during that live exposure.
This feels very Pro Football Focus freshman All-American Christian Bittenker. I mean, Drew, you mentioned we didn't have a lot of verifieds. You talked about that. We get to see him in the postseason, not only at the All-American Bowl, but parts of our staff got to see him in Hawaii as well. Just dependable, steady Eddie, and when you play that position, it's so much more of a subjective position than it is objective. What I mean by that, it's a feel position. It's an instinctive position. You have to know where the soft spots are in the defense, how to make yourself open and available. I think he's going to be one of Cade Klubnik's best friends very quickly within that offense. And you talked about Garrett Riley, a guy that knows how to get those guys the football. I expect big things out of Christian Bittenker. Drew, let's go down the list and let's get to these pass catchers. And we talked about the Freaky Four. How about the Fab Four, right? Let's start at the top. A guy that you know very well. The kids would say, hey, that is him. Well, that is Jeremiah Smith, the first ever receiver to be ranked number 1 in 24/7 sports history. You see the pro comp there. Julio Jones, for the kids that might not remember Julio Jones, he was a dog. Jeremiah Smith is also a dog. Drew, you've seen this guy since he was like 13. Tell me why he ended up as the number 1 player in the country.
I tweeted it out a few weeks ago, right? Doing some self-scouting, going back to our initial top 100 for the 2024 class. Jeremiah Smith was 38th, okay? At the time, he was like 170 pounds. He weighed in at the All-American Bowl at 214. It used to be, we talked about Jeremiah Smith, and he was the, cousins. He was cousins with Geno Smith. That's how Jeremiah Smith's name has come out. I haven't heard that referenced in like over a year. Jeremiah Smith has just cemented himself as the guy. And, multi-sport checks that box up. I think the production as well. Did not have to show up to the All-American Bowl. He did not have to participate. What did he do? He put on a show. He caught the first touchdown pass in the game. Then he was a little frustrated when he didn't get the ball later. Anyone you talk to in the scouting community, generational talent comes up. He's the best I've seen out of South Florida in my 8 years living down there. Like, he's the guy. And I think him getting fine-tuned by Brian Hartline is kind of the scary part. Brian Hartline seems to get the most out of his wide receivers, and he's going to get the most out of Jeremiah Smith.
So when we say generational talent, let's set the table a little bit. What does that mean? Is that Marvin Harrison Jr.? Is this a guy that is going to step on the field day one in Columbus and be one of the best players at his position in the country? Your personal expectations at Ohio State for Jeremiah Smith?
I saw Marvin Harrison at the Under Armour Future 50, I think, before his senior season. Did not see what he did at Ohio State, right? Tons of live exposure to Jeremiah Smith over the years. You can go back to the scouting report I have on his profile from his freshman year, potential wide receiver one. What I'm saying is I think Jeremiah Smith can be better than Marvin Harrison. We'll see. He's got to show up, take care of business, but I think that potential is there.
I don't know if we can bet on it, but if we could, I'd probably bet the odds of Jeremiah Smith falling outside of the top 10. I feel really comfortable about that 3 to 4 years down the line. The NFL, Jeremiah Smith, one of the safest bets I think we've seen in a long time, probably since just last year. The other guy playing his football in Columbus, Caleb Downs, on the other side of the ball. All right, we talked about him. There's another guy I think they call him as well. That is Cameron Coleman, 6'3", 180 pounds. You talk about a guy that's got a 4.48 at 10.8 broad to his name. The other thing I like about this kid, well, he doubled and tripled some of the most important statistical categories this year in the state of Alabama. And Drew, I mean, he's just gotten better and better every time we have seen this kid. The other thing about him, he's still 17. He's a puppy, but he plays like a grown man. Tell me what you like about Cam Coleman.
I think any other year, he's wide receiver one in this class. You could say that about a number of these pass catchers. You said it's a deep, deep year at wide receiver. I just love the athletic ability. I mean, tested off the charts at the Under Armour camp. Production was kind of the question mark for us. But if you go back to his junior season, his team faced IMG Academy. He saw Ellis Robinson. He saw some of those other blue chip cornerbacks, and he produced and created separation in that setting. I think about him going to Auburn, Hugh Freeze. Tigers haven't had a 1,000-yard receiver since the 1999 season. You said you want to bet on something? You want to bet on Jeremiah Smith being a top 10 pick? I want to bet on Cam Coleman being the first 1,000-yard wide receiver for Auburn. Where can I get that action?
I feel pretty good about that. All right, so we talked about Jeremiah Smith. We've talked about Cam Coleman. I go down the list here, and you start thinking about number 3. I mean, you and I and the rest of the team at 24/7 Sports, we had some very, I would say, intense discussions about this receiver 2 spot. Who was that going to be? Cam Coleman ends up getting the nod, but I tell you what, Ryan Williams, who's really supposed to be in the class of 2025, he signed with Alabama today. Man, you talk about one of the most dynamic players in the country, and the first thing that comes to my mind is that guy right there, Devontae Smith. Not only because of the frame, he's a little bit slender, but you talk about the run after catch and downfield playmaking ability. Drew, this guy feels really rare, and I would say it is rare for somebody his age and where he is physically to be able to step on the field day one. But when I saw him at Alabama, Mississippi, which is an absolutely loaded all-star event, he was the best player there, and he was a year younger than everybody else. Drew, I mean, this kind of just feels like the perfect chess piece for Kalen DeBoer year one to be able to have a guy like this step into his program.
Terry Bussey was the news of today, right? That's because we didn't know what his decision, what he was going to do. Was he going to stick with Texas A&M? Kalen DeBoer getting Ryan Williams, beyond important. All right, he's a guy that doesn't have the SEC footprint on the recruiting front. When Ryan Williams decommitted after Nick Saban announced that he was retiring, me personally, I thought, all right, this kid's going to end up at Auburn or LSU, maybe Georgia, Texas, one of those schools. And then Kalen DeBoer gets it done. It's important, and I'm going to tee you up here because you have the stats. Ryan Williams is going to play in 2024. There is no other option for the Crimson Tide. I mean, yes, they could add some guys in the transfer portal, but we're talking someone that reclassified from 2025 to 2024. The Crimson Tide are going to need him right away.
He has to. Jermaine Burton, 39 starts, career. Malik Benson, 6 starts. Ja'Cory Brooks, 10 starts. Isaiah Bond, 12 starts. That is 67 starts Alabama is missing from their receiver room. And you talk about what are they bringing in? Guys like Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, who've been in that program, they've played a little bit, but these are guys that still haven't got a lot of run. Ryan Williams, you talk about that talent. It's going to be very difficult to keep off the field. The other thing about this with Kalen DeBoer, you feel a little bit more comfortable with the outlook of Ryan Williams as well. What he was able to do with guys like Rome Odunze is probably going to be a top 10 draft choice in the 2024 draft. Guys like Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk, Jeremy Bernard, who's now in Tuscaloosa. Those were 4 or 5 guys deep that were all getting fed. There was plenty of food to go around. Yes, you had the distributor and a guy like Michael Penix. I think he's going to be looking to recreate that with Jalen Milroe and Tuscaloosa. Plenty to go around in that Kalen DeBoer
And
offense.
Austin Mack, that was their Washington's quarterback of the future. He transfers in there in Tuscaloosa. I'll say this about Ryan Williams. The reclassification stuff, I don't think it's going away. We've done the data, looked at guys that have done it. The track record isn't great. Ryan Williams, I have no questions about. 2-time Gatorade Player of the Year in the state of Alabama. He's produced a ton. He's played 39 games. He's ready to go, and we saw that in the all-star setting. He might be the exception right now when it comes to the reclassification.
A lot of eyeballs in the state of Alabama. A lot of good ones this year. Cam Coleman, Ryan Williams. But, Drew, how about this guy in the state of Florida? Some say it's your backyard, maybe not. TJ Moore. You talk about a riser, a guy that jumped over 80 spots after what he did at the All-American Bowl. And in case you didn't watch that game, well, he had 165 yards receiving. He also had 2 touchdowns as well. MVP went to Corey Parrish. I think it could have went to TJ Moore if the East would have pulled off that one. But Drew, this guy showed up 6'3", 195 pounds. And the first thing that kind of went through my mind is, where the heck has this guy been on Clemson's roster? It's been a long time since we've seen a guy like T. Higgins or Justin Ross. Where are these dudes? And immediately I thought to myself, here he is, right? And at the end of the day, we felt very comfortable making this guy a 5-star, putting him in the top 32. Drew, we saw 19 of the top 20 receivers in the country over a 3-week period. This guy was one of the best pound for pound.
Yeah, all cycle we thought Bryant Wesco was the guy for Clemson. And we're not writing off Bryant Wesco here, but after seeing those two in the all-star setting, right, comparing their senior seasons, it was clear TJ Moore is the potential wide receiver 1, I think, for the Clemson Tigers. And we'll see how this plays out. Something I'm going to be studying. All right, who does separate themselves? We think it's TJ Moore right now. Bryant Wesco has some traits as well. TJ Moore, to me, you think about potential freshman All-Americans. ACC, man, freshman wide receivers can play right away. We saw Kevin Concepcion last year, Eric Singleton at Georgia Tech. And again, I don't want to keep bringing it up and hammering this home, but Clemson, they're not in the transfer portal. And if you go back to their 2023 class, I think it was 8 guys played over 350 snaps. TJ Moore is going to be a guy for them. And you could say that about the entire recruiting class for the Tigers. So excited about him. I think his second gear, right, when the ball's deep, run under it, he can adjust. I think that's what really stands out about TJ.
Their margin of error is so much slimmer because of the way that they operate. And hey, to each their own, right? If you're going to recruit the high school level, they've had a lot of success, especially in the defensive line. You think about guys like Peter Woods, TJ Parker, you think about Christian Bentancur, right? Those are guys that can play early. You're going to need them to play early if you're not going to dip into the transfer portal. Drew, you said remember the name, right? I think that's a category that we want to talk about. Well, that's important because we got 34 receivers within the top 247. So there are a lot of guys that deserve a lot of love. Let's start with one that just really consistently worked his way up our board. That's Kylan Billiot heading to LSU. Guess what? Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, both those guys are going to hear their name pretty early in the next couple months for the NFL draft. I feel pretty good about what they got coming back in that receiver room. Cortez Hankton's done a phenomenal job. Might not be year 1, but this dude seems like he's up next in Baton Rouge.
Classic case of just being kind of in the middle of nowhere. Kylan Billiot, you can't find the statistics for him on Max Preps or in the newspapers or anything. I was talking to him about it at the All-American game. I said, I couldn't find any information on you. And he's like, well, how did you guys invite me to this all-star setting? I said, we believed in the tape, and we did believe in it. Shows up in San Antonio, and he's a quarterback's best friend, and that's what it should be, matching up the tape with the live evaluation. I think he's just one of these guys where you're going to look up 2-3 years from now, how was LSU the only guy on them? And they always do an excellent job in the boot. But he's an LSU receiver, long stride, high hipped, can go get the football. I think he has a very bright future there for the Tigers.
Terrebonne High School, home of Louisiana. I see you, baby. You're not in the middle of nowhere. Don't you worry about that. Another guy who had a big week at the All-American Bowl. How about our guy, Jordan Shipp, man? North Carolina is one of those programs you better check out what they're doing, because every year they just seem to pump out this talent, and you wonder where they get it from. Well, he was hooking up with the guy, Jaden Davis, who's going to play his football at Michigan. A lot of people thought, hey, is Shannon Goodwin the guy? He's also heading to Ann Arbor. I don't know, Drew. This guy showed up in San Antonio, pound for pound. I thought he was one of the best players there.
Ready to play size. I'm going to steal that term from our guy, Gabe Brooks, on the 24/7 Sports scouting team. Past 2 seasons, 128 catches, 223 yards, 29 touchdowns. Production matters, right? Study the guys that are getting the job done on Saturdays and Sundays. They had huge senior seasons. I heard this from someone in Chapel Hill, right? Jordan Shipp, before he showed up at the All-American Bowl, he went through Duke Mayo Bowl practices with the Tar Heels. They said that he exceeded expectations. Remember, Tez Walker's out. I think there's a chance Jordan Shipp can get into that rotation sooner rather than later. 2
other names pay attention to here. How about Courtney Crutchfield going to Missouri? I mean, a lot of people invested in Ryan Wingo. If this was a consolation prize, I don't see much difference. Love Courtney Crutchfield. Malcolm Simmons, you think about that receiving core. A lot of people talking about Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, Bryce Kane. What about this dude? One of the most athletic profiles in the country. Emily, there you have it. A lot of nerdy receiver talk for you. We'll send it back to you in Studio A.
I love it. I love how excited you guys get about all of this, and I learn a whole lot. Speaking of learning, we're going to continue to do that and bring in national recruiting analyst Brian Doan to do some ACC superlatives. And Brian, let's just start with the instant impact player. Tigers fans are going to be happy about your pick for this one. Wide receiver TJ Moore. He was a late addition to 5-star status, but how can he come in and make an instant impact at a position of need for Clemson?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head right there. First, it's a position of need, so there's going to be plenty of competition, for spots, but he's a guy that the talent aspect really shines. I know Andrew and Cooper just spoke about him a little bit. 6'3", 195, he can run. The thing that really stands out to me with him is it doesn't matter if it's single coverage, double coverage, just throw the ball up to him. He's going to find a way to get it. He can stretch the field. He really can get separation down the field. He's a kid that, 50 catches, 1,200 yards, 17 touchdowns. He does a lot in a lot of different ways, and it's not just the long ball. He knows how to sit in the zone and get open. He really works the field well, whether it's the middle, the outside. Going one-on-one with them is really difficult unless you have some really good length at the cornerback position.
I'm hoping to be a mismatch there. Your pick for sneaky good class is the number 27th ranked group, and that is NC State. What do you like so much about this class?
Geez, it's almost like they turned over half their roster with so many kids that they brought in. You're talking about 24 high school kids that they signed, another 12 in the transfer window. And for me, they turned over the skill position room on the offensive side a lot. 8 new receivers, right, from the high school ranks and also from the transfer portal. They got a couple of really big-time players from near campus. Terrell Anderson, Jonathan Paylor, who's kind of like one of those, what you used to call all-purpose back. You could line them up everywhere. They flipped Keenan Jackson, a UNC commit. And then on top of that, they go and get the Coastal Carolina quarterback, who I think everybody knew, despite being at Coastal, with Grayson McCall, in the 3-time Sun Belt Player of the Year, threw for 10,000 yards and 88 touchdowns. They go and get the running back from Duke, Jordan Waters, 820 yards, 12 touchdowns. And by the way, they also brought in Noah Rogers, a receiver from Ohio State, who's from North Carolina, spent a year at Ohio State. And it was almost one of those things where you always felt like he belonged at one of the Carolina schools, even when he went to Ohio State. So they just flipped their entire receiver room and a lot of their roster.
Yeah, doing a lot of work in the transfer portal, but this is just the second time they've had a top 30 recruiting class in the 24/7 Sports era. So they're bringing in players from all different walks of life. Let's do your pick for Diamond in the Rough. It is Virginia Tech safety Quentin Reddish. Now, this is probably a guy that some people are hearing for the very first time. So tell us, why does he need to be on our radar at the next level?
Well, I think, first of all, for me is, he's a really productive player. He's a safety who has great length, 6'2", 185-ish. He's already at Virginia Tech. He went above 20 miles per hour with the catapult, which is one of the things we're really doing now to measure top end speed. And he's really wowed people in the early workouts, but he's a guy that he can play either safety position because he'll hit you. He can also cover. He can flip his hips and kind of run, help down the field. If you need him to go in the slot, I think he can do some of that as far as man-to-man coverage. And he's got tremendous ball skills. You're talking about a guy who not only had close to 200 tackles in his high school career, 14 interceptions, 34 pass breakups. He's always around the ball. And, in a high school game, you don't see a lot of throwing all the time. And when he's back there, you kind of know why, because he can play center field with the best of them.
Call that a ball hawk. Let's go to your pick for baddest dude. It is Miami wide receiver JoJo Trader. What about his game makes him so bad, but in a good way?
Well, look, he's a sensational athlete who catches everything. He makes the routine look easy. And listen, everybody can tell, like, I'm old, right? I remember when the U was coming up, when Schnellenberger was building them, and then the attitude that was associated with the U, and the documentaries, and he's got some of that. Well, he's got a lot of that, whether it's catching a touchdown, spinning the ball, out jumping a corner to get the ball, and then, kind of pushing his hand down a little bit to suggest how small the corner may be compared to him. But at the end of the day, he's also just a sensational athlete who, look, Miami needs receivers to step up. They lose Colby Young in the transfer portal to Georgia, who was very productive for them. They'll probably look for a receiver in the portal after the spring, but that means JoJo gets a chance to really showcase his skills, and he'll have a chance to win some playing time there.
Yeah, got a pretty good quarterback, too, throwing him some passes down in South Beach. Looking forward to that connection. Your pick for a team that maybe needs some more hype is Florida State. Brian, they're 12th in the nation, so this is a really solid group. Why do they need more attention?
Well, I think a lot of people just look at it and kind of fell out of favor a little bit with how their season ended, and then you have the lawsuit going on, and it wasn't a good showing with Georgia, and we know what happened with the quarterback situation. But up until a little while ago, they were going to have their first top 10 class since 2017. You mentioned they finished 12th, which is still sensational. You're talking about 10 kids in the top 247. 16 4-stars. They bring in 23 high school kids, 15 transfers, a lot of skill, a couple running backs, 4 receivers, 4 DBs. 2 kids I really like in Jamari Howard and Charles Lester at the cornerback spot. I'm in the Northeast. I'm a defense guy first. I love it. So I love what they bring. And then you got your quarterback in DJ Uiagalelei. I hope I got that, which it's interesting because we all know how it ended with Clemson. He goes out to Oregon State, does really well out there. And the feeling back east may not be as good with him as it was in the West. So it's really his chance to kind of push Florida State to some greater things even this year.
DJU. We're just saying DJU as we welcome him back into the ACC. I cannot wait for some of those revenge games. Brian, thank you so much for breaking down those ACC superlatives. Hey, as a reminder, we are offering 60% off annual VIP subscriptions. Definitely recommend you take advantage of that. That deal ends tonight at midnight Eastern, so make sure that you sign up. Guys, we are getting ready for a live commitment coming up. That's my man, Keona Wilhite. He is ready to pick. Yay, okay, he can hear us. He is picking between UCLA and Nebraska. Looking forward to seeing his family and hearing from him about the wild twists and turns that his recruitment has taken. So stay tuned for that in just a bit. But first, let's go over to our war room.
Let's talk about the big uglies, man. Those guys need a little bit of love. And if you don't have them, you're in trouble. So let's talk about some of the best fits. Andrew, we got to start with our guy in San Antonio. He walked off the bus and we're like, hey, who the heck is this guy? How about, hey, we said this was a Wisconsin type of program show now. About Kevin Haywood, my man. What do you think about that fit in Madison?
I love it. It reminds me of kind of what Wisconsin did a few years ago when they had it cranking. They would get these developmental tackle prospects that are long, have traits, and then they would stash them on the roster and let the cream rise to the top. I think Kevin Haywood was the eye-opener for us. We've said it all cycle. Not a ton of premium tackles out here. if the wide receivers are loaded, then the offensive tackles, it's depleted in the 2024 cycle. Kevin Hayward, he ends up finishing in the top 100 for us. A guy I think that Penn State, should have been on, but he wanted to be at Wisconsin. Talk about Luke Fickell, player development program there. I think this is a future NFL guy.
6'6", 299 pounds. I think the biggest thing, obviously the size kind of jumps out a little bit, but so quick, right? Quick twitch, explosive. You talk about that foot and that body quickness. The other thing, he kind of went viral down there in San Antonio, finishing one, I think, against Dylan Stevenson, the Stanford signee. So you love the physicality, you love the nastiness and the finish at the position. I think he's going to fit in beautifully in the Big Ten. Let's talk about Georgia, man, because you cannot talk about best offensive line hauls in the country without talking about the University of Georgia. A lot of beef. And another guy that kind of worked his way, I would say, into our favor. How about Michael Uani? And then you pair him with a guy like Daniel Calhoun. Those guys seem perfect for what Kirby Smart wants to do in Athens.
Well, I just said it. It's kind of a down year for the athletic offensive tackles. What does Georgia do? They go and they get a bunch of mass. Did the research. Georgia's offensive line class, 6-man haul. All of them are over 6'5", and they average 345 pounds on the scales. This would be the heaviest offensive line class, or it is, in the SEC in the past 5 years. I didn't even want to keep looking past that. Daniel Calhoun, to me, is just Georgia. This is a guy they need to get. I know they're excited about him in Athens. And then Michael Uiani, light on his feet. I thought he moved exceptionally well. There were some big boys in Orlando at that Under Armour All-America game. Just during warm-ups, how he changed directions, very, very promising. To me, this group of offensive linemen reminds me like Jamari Slayer, Andrew Thomas, guys in the middle that can move the chains, let those running backs run free, and let whoever's playing quarterback stand back there and fire away.
It's hard to play early in Athens, I think, at any position. It's really hard to crack that lineup at the offensive line. If there was one guy, I think that would be Daniel Calhoun. Just kind of fits what they're looking for. You're talking about a guy, 7-foot wingspan, 37-inch arms. Not sure if that's going to hold up if we had him here with the tape measure, but still, 35-inch arm is going to put him in an elite category. Drew, kind of off-roading here, I wonder, you look at positions that have the most to gain from a postseason setting. Would you put offensive line kind of close to the top there?
Yeah, it gets difficult at times. A couple of years ago we had the opening finals, and then they would start to invite offensive linemen. The measurements, like you just said, that is such an important thing for us, all right? Everyone says they're 6'6". Who actually, when we measure them, is going to be 6'6"? What is that arm length? I think the one-on-ones tell a little bit of the story, but just how they move. And some of these guys, you don't get them at the regional combines. We don't get to see them go through a workout. There's a reason why college coaches, they get out on the road in the spring evaluation period, why you'll see Stacy Searles standing on the sidelines with a camcorder from 2000. That footage is being watched at some point down the line, all right? That's why it's important. The in-person evaluations are key. Tape is king, but the in-person, getting your eyes around them is just as important.
Definitely some tension when you kind of break out the, whatever you measure them with. Everybody's 6'2" until they're not, until they're 5'9", right? Story of my life. All right, Drew, let's talk about a couple of these interior bodies. Man, you talk about guys who made really good impressions. How about Cooper Cousins going to Penn State? 6'6", center, guard. We don't see that a lot, right? I think this guy can play tackle, but man, you talk about one of the true just center positions, like guys who just fit the mold and the mentality, everything you're looking for. You talk about the versatility as well. You see him getting up to the second level. I love the way that he finishes. This is a guy who's built to play football up north in the Big Ten Conference. What'd you like about what you saw out of him in San Antonio?
Fires out of his stance, you said it, how he moves. I remember a clip from inside the Alamo Dome. He was out by Jeremiah Smith, who had caught like a swing pass blocking for him. He's headed to Penn State, who's probably going to use him on the interior. At like 95% of programs around the country, they'd be using him at tackle because he looks like an offensive tackle. He's also got one of the biggest necks I've ever seen. I wanted to get the tape measure out, and it was a 20-inch neck. He is a thick, thick cat. Penn State, their strength and conditioning program, Cooper Cousins is going to be a monster moving forward, and the fact that he can snap the football only makes him that much more valuable.
Penn State's got a lot of tools, especially when you think about that offensive line, what they did there last year, Anthony Donka. You think about Javen Williams as well. Bring in a guy like Cooper Cousins, kind of ties it all in together. They got to get that offense going a little bit. New OC, we'll see what happens there. Drew, I'll tell you what, for as much criticism as Clemson and Dabo Swinney gets, we talk about him a lot, awfully about these guys that could have a potential impact early. Another one, Elijah Thurman, kind of came on the radar late, had a really good week in Orlando at the Under Armour All-America game. What do you think about this kid? I kind of love his long-term potential at the center position for Dabo Swinney.
Yeah, Torian Wilson, who was the offensive line coach there at the Under Armour game, good friend of mine, he said Elijah Thurman's going to be able to play right away. He just thought he was the most technically advanced, or one of the most technically advanced guys in that type of setting. I think what stands out about Elijah Thurman is, again, that versatility. He can snap the football. He can play right tackle. He can play both of those guard spots. Clemson, again, not in the transfer portal. I think they offered one, like Division II lineman. Didn't end up getting him. I think Elijah Thurman's a guy that is going to be playing come ACC time. Athletic, dual sport athlete, average a double-double on the hardwood. That's a key indicator of future success. And he also throws the shot put for those offensive linemen.
We all know it's very difficult to play and to start early at the next level, whether you're a tackle, whether you're playing on the interior. Some of the guys that do that this past year, well, they were ranked the #1 offense and #2 offensive lineman in the country. Caden Proctor and Francis Mawanoa. Some guys like Caden Green, we saw that as well as Lance Hurd got a little bit of run. Drew, this year, the tackle pool was a little bit lighter. You talked about some of the names that have emerged late in the process. But the guy at the top of the board, he's pretty good, and you expect him to make an impact early for Deion Sanders in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah, you're talking about Jordan Seaton, man. Colorado, got to protect Shadur. 56 sacks last season. That was the second most in the FBS level. That's how much they allowed. Jordan Seaton, he's someone that was in our initial top 100 for the 2024 class. He was ranked, I think, number 100. At the time, we thought he was a big, pudgy individual. Fast forward to this year, he transfers into IMG Academy, and he completely reshapes his body. I think he's one of the few guys in this class that can be a left tackle on Saturdays, might be a right tackle on Sundays if he's to make it, but he can react. He's a nasty finisher, refortify, light on his feet. They loved him at IMG Academy. There's a reason why so many schools wanted Jordan Seaton, and Colorado won out because they've invested in Jordan Seaton.
Quick twitch, explosive. I think the first thing that you see from Jordan Seaton, he's got a really mature game. He's really never out of position. Kind of reminded me a little bit of Troy Fautanu. Everybody wanted to put Troy Fautanu in a hole and say, hey, you're going to be a guard at the next level. More than likely going to be a first-round draft pick, has played left tackle for Washington. Obviously, their run to the national championship. Drew, the last guy here, very quickly, Eugene Brooks, Oklahoma. We like this kid a lot.
Best in one-on-ones at the Under Armour All-America game. Oklahoma is losing a ton. I think 4 guys to the NFL from that offensive line. You also had Caden Green transfer to Missouri. Someone's got to block for Jackson Arnold. Keep an eye on Eugene Brooks. He's a road grader in the middle. Excellent throwing data markers on him. He has heavy hands, and he's got a ton of power in the lower half.
I wouldn't call Oklahoma sneaky in terms of what they do at the offensive line, but they know what they're doing. So everything offensive line right there. Andrew Ivins breaking it all down. Back to Studio A.
Love it, guys. Well, one of the top players in Arizona out of South Point Catholic is about to join us to make his college commitment. Defensive lineman Keona Wilhite. He originally signed with Washington, got out of the NLI after Kalen DeBoer left for Alabama. Here's what you need to know about Keona Wilhite. The Tucson product is the 13th ranked player in the state of Arizona and a top 90 defensive lineman in this class. Got a big smile, too, that we're about to see here live. But since changing course from the Huskies, he has narrowed it down to 2 finalists. He is picking between Nebraska and UCLA. Before we bring him on, let's talk about him, the prospect. Huff, what kind of player is he?
Well, he's an impact player, whether he's playing inside or outside. He's got the ability to play on the edge. He can move inside, be that quick defensive lineman who's got the strength and the burst to get past interior offensive linemen that might have a size advantage on him, but he's got that quickness off the edge where he can get around those tackles. And overshadowed a bit by Elijah Rushing, his teammate, but what a great defensive line tandem that they made. And with Keona, this is the kid that I think his best football is going to be played when he gets to college because of that positional versatility, because of the athleticism, with the motor he plays with. He plays with an edge to his game. He's got a chip on his shoulder. He wants to go out there and dominate. He wants to be the guy that's getting double teamed, triple teamed when he's being blocked by offensive linemen. And so you see a guy that just really wants to get into the opposing backfield consistently, and he plays each play like he's ticked off and he's trying to make it personal with the running back or the quarterback.
I love it. Nebraska fans, UCLA fans getting excited hearing all of that. But let's waste no more time and welcome in the man of the hour, Keona Wilhite. Keona, thank you so much for being here. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank y'all for having me.
I love it. We're going to ask you a couple questions, and then we'll give you the floor to tell us where you're headed. I've got to ask about this wild road that has been your recruitment. Take me back to when you found out that your head coach that you signed to play for was leaving. What was that like?
It was a real shocker after all the talks we had about him staying. But once he left, it's been a roller coaster since then. But I've had my family by my side and prayed about it, and I'm here now today about to commit.
Keona, what was the process like just trying to get out of your NILI with Washington so that you could explore some of these other schools and get involved? Was it a strenuous process to get out of the NILI, or did it become kind of easy given that so many players around the country were trying to get out of NILIs with coaching changes?
It was kind of strenuous because it took a while longer than it was thought. But once I got out of it, then I was able to explore and go on another recruiting journey.
Big fella, man, congrats, a big day for you. Who's here to help you celebrate your big day?
My mama, Maida Davis, my little sister, Chloe Davis, my father, James Davis.
I love it. We know you do not get to this place alone, so glad that you were able to give them a shout out. But Keona, without further ado, you have the floor. Tell us where you're headed.
Before I do say where I'm headed, I want to thank everybody that's been part of this process and giving me hope and a lot of advice. A big person, part of that was God, for allowing me to walk this path and giving me all the opportunities he has given me. Without him, I really don't think I'd be here today, especially not without my father or my mom, especially without my siblings either. They've given up a lot just to see me walk this path and be great at it. But I also want to thank all the schools that have recruited me in my high school. They've given me a lot of confidence, especially when I was feeling down. And I really appreciate them for all they've done for me. But that being said, I'll be spending the next 3 to 4 years at the University of Nebraska.
Go Big Red!
Big Red!
There you have it. Keona Wilhite officially going to be a Cornhusker. A huge congratulations to you. I know that that's a big sigh of relief finally making that official. So tell us, why Nebraska?
I chose Nebraska because I see myself really growing there, especially with the coaching staff. I'll be able to focus a lot better while developing and making my way to the league.
Keona, what kind of player is Nebraska going to get in Keona Wilhite? What kind of player is Matt Rule and defense coordinator Tony White getting? How would you describe yourself to the Husker fans that are excited about your arrival in Lincoln?
If I had to describe myself, in one word, I'd say a dog. Because I'm a hard worker. I don't like taking things easy because I don't feel like taking things easy will make them better. So, yeah, I'm a hard worker, and every time I touch that field, I promise I'll play every down like it's my last.
Big fella, what's your message for all the Nebraska fans out there watching you today?
Go Big Red.
I love it. You're going to be saying a lot of Go Big Red in that household. Keona, congratulations. Thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of your big day.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you to Keona and the Davis family for joining us here on National Signing Day. You can read more about this new commitment at Huskers247.com. They got all things Nebraska. A huge class coming in for the Cornhuskers and Matt Rule, so read up about it at Huskers247.com. Let's toss it over to the War Room.
The favorite position of the Oyster Boys. How about the point of attack, right? We talked about offensive line. Now it's time to talk about defensive line. Drew, we're going to put our own spin on it. We're going to talk about the best position hauls. And how about this? When is the last time you ever said the best defensive line position haul came from west of Texas? That has been a long time, maybe early 2000s, Pete Carroll, USC. Well, how about it? I think Dan Lanning, Oregon, they got a pretty good case. I mean, you go down the list here, brother. Who do you got? Elijah Rushing, 5-star Aiden Breland was in the mix at one point. Jericho Johnson, Zadavian Sims. Both of those guys we saw in San Antonio at the All-American game. Dynamic group. And we kind of know the identity of Dan Lanning, what he wants to do and kind of build this team with an SEC type of feel. I think Oregon Duck fans are just kind of sick of hearing SEC feel. This is Dan Lanning. This is his mentality. He's sticking at Eugene, man, in the teeth of what this program is going to be, especially as they head towards the Big Ten here in 2024, is at the defensive line, and look no further than what they did in 2024.
It looks like a program that knows it's moving into a physical Big Ten conference, right? Aiden Breland, huge win for them in LA. Elijah Rushing, another big win for them in Arizona. Cooper, to me, when you start rattling off those names, think about what Oregon did on the defensive line in the 2023 cycle. Young Concrete, Blake Purchase, both those guys got some run early on in their Duck careers. That is the strength of the group. Xavier Sims was a huge surprise for us at the All-American Bowl. It's kind of one of those ones where you have to check the roster multiple times. All right, who is this guy? Twitchy interior pass rusher, can dent pockets and get after the quarterback. So I think what's unique about this unit, different body types, that at the end of the day, it's adding depth, and you're going to be able to create a situation where your defensive line group, you can roll 6, 7, 8, 9 guys, and you're going to need to do that not only in the Big Ten, but when you get to the college football playoff later in the season, we're adding extra games to the schedule. Defensive linemen get banged up as the season goes along. There's a lot of guys with injuries. So that's what I like about the unit and the investment in that position room.
And let's call a spade a spade. Defensive linemen in the transfer portal, especially when the Ducks are taking shots at guys like Walter Nolan, guess what? They're expensive, right? And they ended up at places like Ole Miss. It's no shot at anybody. That's a game that's being played. You have to get these guys at the point of attack in high school. I thought the thing that was interesting about Dan Lanning when Alabama pursued him, maybe some people in Tuscaloosa say that Kalen DeBoer was the #1 target. I just thought that fit made a lot of sense. That's neither here nor there. I think the biggest thing is for Dan Lanning, he said, why would I leave? I have everything I want here in terms of the resources, but also here's the other thing that stands out. We're talking about this defensive line group. Aiden Breland from Mater Dei, Southern California. You talk about Elijah Rushing. He's from Arizona, and then you look at Jericho Johnson right there in California as well. The only guy outside of that footprint is Xavier Sims. If USC, UCLA, who's got the number 83 ranked recruiting class, in Washington, where Jedd Fisch now finds himself in there after a couple weeks, aren't going to test you, and that's who you got to go through to go get the premium beef on the West Coast, why would I go anywhere else? To me, Drew, it seems like a perfect fit for what Dan Lanning's mentality, vision is for that place. Build up a front seven without a lot of resistance, quite frankly.
Yeah, they're doing it in the 25 and 26 cycles as well. Tony Cumberland, kid out of Arizona, already committed to the Ducks. I mean, this isn't just a one-off. It seems like that's the vision we've set up. We have our plan in place. We're going to chase an Evan Stewart in the transfer portal. And when we're talking about Oregon, you also got to bring up the fact, Cooper, the quarterback position is figured out. And you mentioned guys being expensive in the transfer portal. We're moving towards an NFL model, right? You have to figure out where you don't want to invest. Oregon has the quarterback of the future in Dante Moore. They have Dylan Gabriel. They have it budgeted and allocated. They know what they're capable of doing. This, to me, looks like, all right, we want to get better on the defensive line. We want to have depth there, and we're going to build through the high school ranks. That is going to be our NFL draft. Free agency, transfer portal, we'll get the quarterbacks, we'll get the wide receivers, but at the point of attack, POA, defensive line from the high school.
Ducks currently ranked number 3 per the 24/7 Sports composite team rankings. Guess what? That's good for best ever in Oregon history. Drew, another team that's getting it done at the point of attack. Guy that I used to work for, Mario Cristobal, he used to love recruiting offensive linemen. He also used to say, Coop, let's just hoard the big bodies, right? He's always been about that. That being said, the Mario Cristobal at Oregon versus the Mario Cristobal at Miami, two different guys, at least from what I've seen on the outside in terms of the intentionality that they are recruiting the defensive line position. Drew, for me, one of the biggest hires over the last couple of years has been Mario Cristobal hiring the old Hall of Famer Jason Taylor, and a guy that has injected that room with a ton of top-end talent. I mean, let's start with the Canes. They flipped Justin Scott, the 5-star defensive lineman, top 15 player in the country, out of the state of Illinois from the Ohio State Buckeyes. Marquise Lightfoot, another guy out of the state of Illinois. He was knocking on the door of 5-star status. And then Booker Pickett, who maybe had the best postseason appearance of any other player that we've seen. Doesn't matter the position. This guy was kind of hell on wheels over the last couple of weeks. So, Drew, I look at Miami, and a lot of people want to talk about the offensive identity, what they get done at the point of attack, Mario Cristobal, Alex Mirabal. To me, you think about a 12-team playoff, and you think about how maybe Miami can find their way there. I think it's creating the path that they have already started to lay the foundation of what they've done over the last 2 cycles. And you talk about guys like Ruben Bain and guys they got coming in, man, there is a lot to be excited about in Coral Gables.
Well, 2023, the focus for Miami seemed to be on the offensive line, and they hit with Francis Mauanoa, Samson Okunlola. We'll see if he plays in 2024. This cycle, they wanted to sign the top defensive line class, and Gabby Urrutia inside the U, he had been saying that for months now. Jason Taylor set his sights on some big names. They didn't get all of them, but man, they cleaned up. Justin Scott, you brought him up out of the Chicago area. Rare body type. I think he's a drain clogger in the middle, a guy that can hold up traffic, allow those pass rushers out on the edge to just run free and get after the quarterback. Jason Taylor, what he did with Ruben Bain as a true freshman, Hurricane Bain, ACC Rookie of the Year defensively. Now that was impressive. Now you think about, okay, he's getting Booker Pickett, who had the best first step at the Under Armour game, and Marquise Lightfoot, who had the best first step at the All-American Bowl. It's scary what this group's going to look like, maybe in 2024, 2025. Like, they have a ton of different weapons, defensive weapons to work with. Booker Pickett, guy we went back and forth in the evaluation process. Is he big enough? I think a lot of schools evaluated him, saw that he had close to 75 sacks in high school, and then backed away. Miami stuck with him, saw a vision, and now it could pay off.
Dude, we didn't even talk about Armando Blunt.
He's the wild card.
Right, he is a wild card. And Armando Blunt, a guy that was a former 5-star class of 2025, he reclasses to 2024. And you think about a guy pretty similar to Ruben Bain in terms of the motor off the edge, quick twitch, explosive, and the range that he plays with as well. Drew, he was somewhat of a projection, but you talk about the athletic clay and what this guy can be. If he can get under Jason Taylor, it might take a year or two, but the payoff could be huge for the Canes.
Yeah, and I had a trainer, and I just remembered this the other day, tell me after they worked Armando Blunt out, closest thing I've seen to Walter Nolan. That's what they said. Maybe even has a better attitude. Another guy that reclassified, all right, you try to slot him into the 32, a lot of guys we like, elite shot put numbers, excited to see what he could be. He could be maybe more of a longer burn. I think Justin Scott's the guy that you look for more of an immediate impact. But hey, we were a little bit wrong on Hurricane Bain. I don't think me and you thought he was going to get that much burn and be that productive year one, so we'll see.
Yeah, that's one of those, hey, maybe it's a mulligan. We'll see in a couple years. Miami fans, if you're out there listening, trust me, you got a hell of a player in Ruben Bain. So we've talked about Oregon. We have talked about Miami. Now it's time to talk about Missouri, right? How about Eli Drinkwitz, man? It's been a tough offseason. I guess it's been a good offseason, but in terms of staff attrition, you lose defense coordinator Blake Baker, Kevin Peoples as well. They're off to LSU. There is a lot to be excited about if you're a Missouri fan. Big donation coming in the other day, right? $50 million in the stadium, another $12 into the NIL fund. How about this defensive line group, man? Williams Nwaneri, that was a big one. Had to stave off Georgia there. Top 10 prospect for us, the 5-star. And then my guy, man, Jaylen Brown. Love him. We'll talk about him in a second. We'll go down the list. But Drew, Williams Nwaneri, a little bit of an enigma, I think you would say, in terms of a guy we're trying to figure out. But the tools. He's got more tools than a Home Depot. The tools are abundant. Drew, tell me what you like about Williams Nwaneri.
He's got the longest reach of any of the blue chip pass rushers in the 2024 cycle. I mean, he has got vines for arms or rakes, if we're sticking with the Home Depot trend here. What I like about Missouri's defensive line haul is, you said Jaylen Brown. How about Elias Williams, a late 4-star for us? They're going to take the pressure off Williams Nwaneri having to be the guy right away. And Williams Nwaneri is someone that, just like with Dylan Raiola at Nebraska, all Missouri fans are going to know about this 5-star. It's kind of like the Luther Burden effect. All eyes are going to be on him. Well, Elias Williams, and Jaylen Brown, those guys are developmental upside as well. And I think as a unit, it's going to be much easier when we got 3 guys and we're not relying on just one guy to, create pressure, stuff the lanes. So that's what I like about that haul for Missouri. Last year under Blake Baker, top 10 defense if you look at the advanced metrics there for Missouri. And they gave a lot of teams trouble in the SEC.
Drew, let's talk about the number 1 pass rusher in the country. We're going to stay in the SEC. How about Jordan Ross, man? And I kind of fell in love with this guy who was in my territory. Vestavia Hills, not that far away from Birmingham, basketball player, only 2.5 sacks as a junior. Here's this guy in the middle of Alabama, not Auburn. He ends up at Tennessee. He kind of goes wire to wire for us. We took a shot on him early. kind of reminds me a little bit of Brian Burns, the All-Pro with the Carolina Panthers. Same frame, kind of coming out of American Heritage. I love this guy for so many different reasons. Reactionary athlete, ascending player as well. Starting to figure it out. Played around 230. I think it was like 210, 215 as a junior. But Drew, I don't think you can call a top 10 player in the country a steal. But it seems like this is the guy at a premium position that's just kind of been glossed over. It feels that way to me, that I think is going to have a huge payout for the Vols and Josh Heupel here.
Do you feel like Nick Saban's kind of like losing his charm? Like, how did this guy in the Yellowhammer State not be turned into a priority for the Crimson Tide? I tweeted it out this morning. Golf clap for Tennessee for making the early identification on Jordan Ross and taking a chance on him. And that's what you need to do. Not a lot of guys, explosive, limber as him, can bend, win with speed and power. At the Under Armour game, at the Polynesian Bowl, there was multiple sequences of just strong play. Hawking guys down in backside pursuit, dipping around the corner, putting his hand up, batting a ball down at the line of scrimmage. Tennessee sneakily generated a ton of pressure. I think they were second in the SEC in tackles for loss last season. James Pierce obviously is the dude. Well, here's another guy coming along, and someone that they beat everyone to the punch to, right? Because if Jordan Ross was on the market following the All-Star games, what is the bidding war for him then? Yeah, Jordan Ross. You talk about a guy to maybe bet on here over the next couple of years to be one of the premier pass rushers in all of college football. Jordan Ross, a very good name. Drew, I'm going to tee you up because that's what good friends do. This is a guy I know you like. Tell us about Nasir Johnson, the guy that flipped from Florida to Georgia. And another guy you want to bet on that says, hey, maybe 3 years from now, where'd this guy come from? We got him inside the top 60, but I think you and I pretty convincingly think he's got top 32 clay. Yeah, Georgia, you talk about the defense, and we're going to get into the linebackers here in a little bit. Linebackers, secondary, that's not the issue. Georgia right now, I think they're kind of lacking, that true elite difference maker in the middle. Now, they have some really talented pieces. We'll see what Jordan Hall looks like here in 2024. But a guy that can be an X factor, like a Jordan Davis, like a Jalen Carter, someone that's just the dude, right? He has a star underneath him if we're playing the video game. Nas Johnson, to me, is someone where, there is a monster ceiling there. Played at Dublin High School, was committed to Florida. I thought Florida was getting a steal. Love how he displaces his weight. I think he could be a Power 5 offensive guard if he wanted to be. But what he does is freaky for a big man and how he moves. I think Nas Johnson is the potential gem of Georgia's class if you want to talk about the defensive lineman. Everyone's talking about Joseph Ajonye. I'm buying stock in Nas Johnson. No surprise the Dogs are getting it done in the trenches, but how about some unconventional names also popping up there as well? Oregon, Missouri, throw in the Canes as well, getting it done. Back to Studio A.
Love to hear it, guys. Hey, a reminder, 60% off annual VIP subscriptions on 247sports.com. You see all the things on the right of your screen that you get with that VIP subscription. In-depth team coverage, recruiting rankings, transfer portal intel. It ends tonight at midnight, so make sure that you take advantage. Hey, we appreciate you joining us here on this National Signing Day, so let's get you caught up. On today's headlines, the biggest question mark going into today, Terry Bussey. He entered the day an unsigned Texas A&M commit, but officially putting pen to paper. Huff, how important was this win for Mike Elko?
It was gigantic because he didn't sign in December, so then he spent 6 weeks wondering, are we going to get him back in the fold? And then you got Georgia and LSU and Alabama all making a push. Those are three of the last few national championships, and Texas A&M didn't have anything to show for when it comes to that. And now they have a defensive head coach, so to hold on to him to get his signature today is, no pun intended, Mike Elko's signature moment as a recruiter at Texas A&M so far.
Come on, that was intended. You can be honest with us here. Hey, more good news, though, for the Aggies. Top 247 wide receiver Ashton Bethel-Roman also signing with Texas A&M today. The former Arkansas signee was released from his NLI, reopening his recruitment. Smoke, tell the Aggies fans out there what kind of guy they're getting in him.
Deceptive playmaker with a crazy catch radius. They throw anything to him, Velcro for hands, he'll stick to him, and you know how to get it to the end zone.
We love to see. Let's mention another wide receiver who has Velcro for hands. That's the number 8 player in the class, Ryan Williams, officially a member of the Crimson Tide. You've also got the number 1 player in Louisiana and defensive lineman Dominic McKinley signing with LSU. and wide receiver Gatlin Bear signing with Oregon. Some more 5-star signees from today's signing day. And it is not a National Signing Day show without some live commitments. Stay tuned. Seattle native Rahshawn Clark is set to commit with us live in just a bit. He signed with Arizona in December. Now Washington is in the mix. Huff, who's the favorite in the race for him today?
Well, I would say that right now that Jedd Fisch's chances of signing Rahshawn Clark for a second time are looking very good. He got out of his NLI with Arizona, visited Washington. Now can the Huskies get their first in-state player in 2024? We'll find out here in the next 30-40 minutes.
That would be his signature moment. Happening this hour, one of the top prospects out of Arizona, defensive lineman Keona Wilhite officially committing to Nebraska. That happened live here on our show. Huff, who are the Huskers getting in this guy?
They're getting one of the most versatile defensive linemen out west, and one of the best years for defensive linemen in the region. They're coming out and actually getting a player outside of the West Coast to go to the Big Ten and play at Nebraska. This is a guy that, speaking of Jedd Fisch, he had him at Arizona, then he signed with Washington, and then ultimately put his name took his NLI, goodness gracious, they got to come up with different letters.
LOI, let's do that.
It was LOI, and got out of it, and now Nebraska's going to get him. Tony White, with his name being mentioned for a number of defense coordinator and head coaching jobs this offseason, staying in Lincoln. Matt Rule, who's got a history of pretty good defensive players under his belt. They get this versatile player in Wilhite, and you heard him describe himself, Smoke, and you asked, a dog. And that's what we said before. He plays with an edge and a chip on his shoulder, and I think Nebraska, who have been pining for the black shirt days, they're going to get a guy that's going to make those old 90s Nebraska defenses very proud.
Top 20 class for the Cornhuskers in this cycle. That's what has happened. Here's what's going to happen. Coming up on the show, we've got SEC superlatives, Big 12 superlatives, more positional breakdowns from our war room, and as I said it, Rahshawn Clark will be committing with us live here in just minutes. We have promised to answer your questions. As a reminder, the way that you submit your questions is in the chat. The only way you can access the chat is by being a subscriber of the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. So make sure that you hit that subscribe button. We're going to hit some of the questions that you have asked us, starting with Smoke. We've got one for you. In a perfect world, what would your ideal signing day structure look like?
I would go with 2 signing days. Right. One signing day for the transfer portal. That's December. Clear that all up. And then come back to today, February. One day. So now you have the perfect understanding, people in the front office and coaches, know how many scholarships that you have remaining from what you've dealt with your transfer portal guys. But right now, what the issues coming up is you don't know what you have on your roster, nor do you know how many scholarships that you have remaining for your high school guys. So the high school players are getting left out. The transfer portal guys are getting in the portal with nowhere to go. So if we clean it up and let everyone know when you can get in and when you can sign in December for the transfer portal guys, and high school guys, wait until February when it kicks off. New year, everybody's happy. Go back to the old ways with just a little bit of sprinkle, because the transfer portal is here to stay.
Okay, so we've done this before. You think we should go back, even now that we've added the transfer portal?
Go back to it. We understand now that it's not working. But it did work forever until somebody wanted to change this. Who knows? But I guess they said 2 days is better than one. For us, it's pretty good because we get to come on and educate everybody on their classes and on signing day. But for the structure of it, I think if you go back to one for the high school players and another one for the transfer portal, I think you'll get a happy okay.
What do you think, Kyle?
I'm a little bit more on the basketball side of things, where they have the November signing period before the season starts, before all the tournaments and tropical islands and Thanksgiving happen. Then they have one in April, after the Final Four, after the NCAA tournament's done, when guys have already declared for the NBA. Those guys that maybe were the late signees know, okay, they need a shooting guard, I'm going to go there. So what if we brought one to August or July, with all this stuff that's going on in December, and now with the expansion and the playoffs, with the season being longer, with the portal, with having to recruit your own roster? They already made an adjustment by having the portal open up right after the championship game where the playoffs were announced. So maybe you just leave that for the portal time. But what if we had signing day in July before fall camp starts in August, and then it really holds those schools accountable that throw out what we know are uncommittal offers? Smoke, you were in the college game. You know there's a lot of offers that go out that there is no chance that player can commit to it. but it looks good on Twitter, looks good on Instagram, but you have no intention. So now you got to be a little bit more accountable to the offers you extend. And if you're extending those offers in the spring and in the early part of the summer, you have to know that maybe in 2-3 weeks at the end of July, those guys are going to sign on the dotted line. They play their senior year. If they don't have a great senior year, that's on you for evaluating them poorly and not expecting that they would mail it in, whatever that may be. Then they can get out of their NLI if there's a coaching change, like we've seen the last couple of years, how many have been, how much mayhem that has caused. But I think an earlier signing in, then maybe you do the February one still, where it's post the guys declaring for the NFL, it's post coaching changes, and then coaches can have a little bit more time in August to focus on their team. They've already got that signing day out of the way, then they can just get to the season.
All right, so here goes a couple of questions. All right. One, in July, they sign, but you just told me they can get outside of their national letter of intent. So what's the reason of signing?
What's the reason of a lot of these things that are going on? What's the reason of having an NLI if we're not going to have unlimited transfer portal opportunities? So that's the thing. It's still, to me, a matter of you limit it to the head coach leaving, not an assistant coach leaving. If the head coach gets fired, resigns, or takes another job, only then can you get out of the NLI.
So let me get to it. So July, the 4th of July date.
No, let's do it. Let's do the end of July.
End of July, there's no real reason other than just saying we want high school players signed before their senior year.
And then coaches can just focus on their team and recruiting their own roster come November, which seems to be the biggest argument that college coaches are saying, is that there's so much going on. And now instead of 4 teams playing in the playoffs, now there's 8 more teams playing in the playoffs. And those 12 are usually the loudest in the room. So if they can take a week off from the lake to sign some guys, so be it.
Smoke just gave you a scenario where you eliminate that by allowing only one window.
So what do you do about the early enrollees?
You're always allowed to enroll early. That doesn't stop you from enrolling early. Sure. That just stops you from having 2 days of signing for high school players. It's the same format that we had 20-something years ago.
I like July.
But if you put you like July because you enjoy your summers. If you're a football coach, you don't have a summer. So when you put this signing day in July, here goes a couple of things that are in effect. That typically what happens, the NCAA just throws dates on without understanding what really happens. So in June, you have summer camps, which is a huge, big-time evaluation for schools and prospects. So now, where do you fit that in?
I still think you do those in June, because if you look, and we were talking about this earlier, the first week in July is now becoming possibly the busiest week for announcements. You are seeing more players when the dead period starts at the end of June, after the June official visits, between June 28th and July 10th, I would say the majority of players are coming off the board, and they're coming off the board earlier and earlier. So now it's like the old days where June is your January.
So let me give you a schedule for you. Let me tell you what's going to happen to wrap it up, all right? So you're going to have better college coaches leaving because this June schedule gives them nothing to do, because you have camp, visits, and I got to get ready I can't get on the road because it's a dead period to go see my best players to sign them in July. So what you're operating on is it's a jumbled up schedule, not enough hours in a day, just to get a few guys signed that in a couple of months to tell you that, can I get out? And you have to say yes.
All right, we're not going to solve all the world's problems on today, but we're certainly going to do our best. And either way, guys, whenever signing day ends up being in the future, you can guarantee that we will be here telling you all about it. Let's go to do some SEC superlatives, because we are tying a bow on the 2024 class. So, of course, we got to talk about the SEC. I said at the very beginning of the show, I'm going to say it a million times. For the 16th straight season, the SEC has the #1 class in the land. That is Georgia. But your instant impact player comes from Auburn. You like wide receiver Cam Coleman. Why?
Perfect segue, because if he had signed in July, he'd be playing for Texas A&M. Instead, he's playing for Auburn, which, hey, tip of the cap to Hugh Freeze. We've seen what he has done with receivers when he was at Ole Miss, and the talented receiver group that he would bring in when he was with the Rebels, and now at Auburn, doing the same thing. Cam Coleman, I talked about it earlier, seeing him in the spring and in the summer on the 7-on-7 circuit, that gap between him and Jeremiah Smith is not that wide. He's the #2 receiver, but the #5 overall player. To have 2 receivers inside the top 5, not that common in an era of pass rushers, offensive tackles, and quarterbacks, but that speaks to how talented that Cam Coleman is. I anticipate that he is going to become an immediate impact player for Auburn. We saw when Hugh Freeze was at Ole Miss, when he brought in that first full recruiting class in the class of 2013. It was a top 3 or 4 class nationally. Several of those players ended up playing as true freshmen. you know that if you're bringing in a player of this ability, of this caliber, you're going to get him on the field, and he's got that talent to be an impact player from the time he steps foot come September.
He's probably going to be asked to be an impact player too. Auburn still rounding out that roster under Hugh Freeze, but a huge win for him in the state of Alabama. Smoke, your pick for a sneaky good class is number 19, Missouri. Where do you see Drink's ability to parlay the success they saw this season into this class?
Well, I'm going to just go out there and say, call Coach Reed and tell me to say this.
No, it's all you.
I'm drinking that. Whatever Drink is pouring out, you're drinking in terms of what he's doing in recruiting. We heard it already. Williams Winery, Jalen Brown. You got Cameron Keys, Jaron Sensabaugh. All he's done is remove, replace, and they're getting better athletes. Winning 10 games last year and winning that final game, yeah, that started his whole entire recruiting thing for him. And they're now gone over that cusp of that okay team. They're now that arrival team that will have a chance. I'm not going to put pressure on them out there. Chance of playing for the SEC championship and getting in that 12-team playoff. They're recruiting the right way. Winning in the state, winning up front, and replacing skilled players with better skilled players early with developmental upside.
Okay, Huff, your pick for Diamond in the Rough is Texas A&M linebacker Jordan Lockhart. What makes him a diamond in the rough?
Well, you know, again, we look at the St. John Bosco program and how many talented players they've produced over the years, and the defensive players they've had just these last couple of years. Mateo Uyunglele, now at Oregon. You had Marcellus Williams going to USC, Peyton Woodyard, Alabama, Kingston Viliamosa going to Notre Dame. Well, Jordan Lockhart was just as much a part of that Braves defense this last year. It took him a while to get his foot in the door and be a starter at St. John Bosco. We got a chance to see him at the Polynesian Bowl, and he was phenomenal from the beginning of the week till the end of the week. He's a three-star guy, high three-star guy, but a player that I think when he gets to college, when he has more opportunities to play, again, Bosco's such a talented team. There was traffic there. There was a number of linebackers he had to play behind. When he gets that chance to really flourish, I think he's going to take it and run with it. It's hard to call a guy who's an 88 a diamond in the rough, but when you look at what A&M has done recruiting-wise, he may not be as highly rated as some of the other guys, and he doesn't have as much film as some of his teammates do, but this is a player that I think his best football is going to be played when he gets to College Station.
All right, Smoke, your pick for baddest dude is the number 1 cornerback in the class, and that is Ellis Robinson. What about his play makes him a bad man?
First word that you want to ever hear from a corner is he's sticky. And that's not because he has glue. He has glue-like feet and cat-like reactions in terms of the corner. But the thing that separates him from most corners that can cover, because you have corners that can cover, corners that can't catch. He's a combination of both. He has sticky coverage, and when you put that ball in the air, he can go get it. And then you stick him with T-Rob. All T-Rob's done in the last few years is produced maybe 2 first-round corners in Mr. Kool-Aid and Mr. Arnold. So coach with player equals success.
Baddest dude. Love that. That's tough to do in the SEC. They're known for having a lot of those guys. The final superlative, Huff is Heisman candidate, and you are picking Florida quarterback DJ Lagway. We talking year 1, or what are you thinking with this pick?
We are not talking year 1.
Okay.
But we're talking that in the very near future, he could be in New York City come mid-December. And if that's the case, then Billy Napier's seat will have cooled off immensely, or he's out of there and somebody else comes in and transforms Lagway into that Heisman Trophy winner. But you look at the dual threat ability that he has. Who just won the Heisman Trophy? The number 2 dual threat quarterback in 2019 in Jaden Daniels, a guy who made teams pay with his legs and his arm, and that's what Lagway has. He's a bigger player than Jaden Daniels is even now in terms of his size. So now that translates what he's done in Texas as a high school player. The stats that he was putting up on Friday nights, both rushing the ball and throwing the ball, were big time. But now there is going to be an expectation. SEC football is a step up from Texas. Obviously, we know that. But a lot of those Texas high school players can make that transition to college pretty quickly. And now there's going to be this expectation from Florida fans that, hey, Billy, we need to get this offense kicking. We need to get this offense revived. What are we going to do? You put in a true freshman, buys you a little bit of time, but this kid has the ability to make Florida fans remember Anthony Richardson, to remember a guy who won a Heisman Trophy and a national championship with them 15 years ago, Tim Tebow, who was just as much of a problem trying to tackle in the open field as he was trying to defend his passes. Well, Lagway has that ability, but he's a much better passer at the same stage than Tebow. So this is a guy that I would not be shocked if in the next year, 2, 3 years, he's in New York City come mid-December at the Downtown Athletic Club.
So you're saying he's getting on the field this year?
I am.
You agree?
1,000%.
Okay.
If not, somebody's getting out of town.
And I don't think it's going to be Lagway.
perspective, I certainly hope we get to see him on the field. And I'm sure Billy Napier hopes to see him on the field as well. We're going to head over to our war room for more positional breakdowns.
Now to talk one of the Oyster Boys' favorite positions to break down. How about the linebackers, man? In a guy that doesn't need a lot of introduction. Let's talk about Sammy Brown, the number 2 linebacker in the country. We have talked a lot about the Clemson Tigers today, Dabo Swinney. He likes to play these freshmen early. Drew, when you think about the epitome of a guy who can play early, how about a guy like Sammy Brown, man? You think about a guy wrestling background, track and field background as well, the number 1 player on your freaks list. What is Clemson getting with this guy?
Someone that fits the culture there all in. Is that the saying at Clemson? I mean, he was the heart and soul of his team the past 3-4 years there at Jefferson High School. You know, in the state playoffs, he goes down with an ankle injury. What happens? This team folds and they exit early. I think whether it's special teams, I mean, Sammy Brown could be a Power 5 running back. The tape's that good there. Clemson is going to need this guy. He looks like Boz with the flow. I think he's a little bit better than Boz, but that was before my time. But just in the box, instincts, it all shows up, Cooper. And you would think he's more of a pass rusher, right? Someone that just goes after the quarterback. That's not what he did at the prep level. He's someone that dropped back into coverage. We were really hoping to get him at the All-American Bowl. Ended up having to get tightrope surgery, but he's there on campus at Clemson. I think he's a name to know in the ACC moving forward.
350 tackles, over 5,000 rushing yards. You know what's funny about Sammy Brown? You turn on the tape, at least it was my opinion, I thought he had a better feel for the running back position than he did a linebacker. I think he's more of an athlete that needs to grow into the linebacker position. I'm not saying that he was ever going to be a running back on Saturdays or even Sundays.
I'm saying he could be.
I'm saying he could be as well, but I also wouldn't be surprised if we see him in some short line situational packages on offense for Garrett Riley. He's too good of an athlete. All right, so that's one player there. The next guy on the list, Notre Dame, man. And it was a guy we needed more information, more context throughout the process. Keep talking about San Antonio and the All-American Bowl. Well, we keep bringing that up because it's one of the only settings in the country. This time of year, you get to see good on good. How about Kingston Viliamu-Asa? I mean, you talk about a guy from St. John Bosco, Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman. They go all the way out west. They beat USC for this guy. USC needs defense. Notre Dame makes him a priority. Drew, I think he's the most instinctive linebacker in this 2024 class. And you talk about a guy that can make an immediate impact. This is the guy that I have circled.
I think he's the most violent of the linebackers here in the 2024 cycle. Someone, you know, we moved up in the rankings, like you said. I saw him at this game here down in South Florida. I mean, sideline to sideline, just drilling people. And you think about Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman. How do they take the next step? Well, the College Football Playoff expanding to 12 teams. You pair him with Bryce Young, who finishes a 5-star for us. That defense is getting better and better. They're getting true difference makers in the middle. It's hard not to think with Kingston Viliamu-Asa, multi-year starter, impact player in the middle. I love everything about him. He was great, like you said. I think with that linebacker, you have to be able to read and react, find your keys and get to the football. He does that at a high level.
What's interesting about Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman, we've always said, right, like they are going to have to find a way to acquire top-end talent. And they took a lot of criticism from the two people on this desk. Maybe I exclude you from that. But for me, they got in the batter's box with Dante Moore. They got in the batter's box with Peyton Bowen. And you kind of go down the list, Keon Keeley. That's tough. They got their heart broken. It's kind of hard to bounce back in the same way that it would be any relationship, right? To say, hey, these are the type of players that we need to bring into our program to reach a national championship. Here's the thing. If you were to say at the beginning of last year, who is going to be the highest ranked player in this class, I think all the money would be on C.J. Carr. He ends up ranked the 3rd, right? How did they do that? It's not that they beat these teams head-to-head. Yes, Viliamu-Asa, they had to do that. These were great early IDs on Bryce Young, who ends up in the top 32 as a defensive lineman out of the state of North Carolina, and a really good one in Kingston Viliamu-Asa, who ends up in our top 50. And people might say, well, hey, those guys seem like no-brainers. Sure, at the end. But where they started in the recruitment, that was not the case. I think Marcus Freeman and his staff deserve a ton of credit for the job that they have done, really saying, hey, we have to overcompensate in today's NIL era, and we just got to be 1% to 2% better than everybody else. Those relationships matter at Notre Dame because at that place, it's all about the fit. Kind of reminds me of my time at UW.
Yeah, and you're seeing that in the 25 cycle right now, number 1 ranked class. And we talked about this a little bit on our show Tuesday. just the early identification, getting those kids on campus, and more importantly, building the relationships and selling kids on South Bend, selling them on the logo, selling them on the tradition of playing there for the Irish. Excellent job so far. I think the 2025 class has a chance to for them to add even more difference makers to the mix.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the Florida Gators. A lot has been talked about DJ Lagway. Billy Napier still putting it together on the recruiting trail. A guy that you really like, late riser for us, Aaron Childs.
Yeah, Aaron Childs, him, Miles Graham, two top 247 linebackers for us. We were split throughout the senior seasons. Which one do we want to have ranked higher? Aaron Childs, to me, always thought he was a more forward-facing linebacker. Then we see him at the Under Armour All-America game. He impressed me in coverage, running with different tight ends and slot receivers. This is a kid that's 222 pounds back in May. He had a 36-inch vertical jump and a 10-foot, 2-inch broad jump. Cooper, those are like NFL combine testing markers for a front seven defender. I think Aaron Childs, with what Florida lost in the transfer portal, Scooby Williams on his way out, just as much as they need a talent infusion on the offensive side of the ball, defense is really where they need to get better. I think Aaron Childs is a guy that is going to play, and he could play as early as week 1 when Miami comes to town.
Yeah, Miles Graham, another linebacker expected to play early out of the state of Georgia. Drew, speaking of Georgia, you can't talk linebackers without talking about the University of Georgia and Kirby Smart. Clint Schumann deserves a lot of credit as well. You think about the guys they brought in last year, about C.J. Allen, you think about Raylan Wilson, Troy Bowles as well, bright future for him. This year they follow it up with Justin Williams, the number 1 linebacker in the country, Chris Cole, not too far behind, a 5-star for us, and then Chris Jones, a guy that we like out of VA. How do these guys keep doing this? And don't they feel like they have a different identity when it comes to really kind of picking out second-level players?
Because Georgia doesn't take developmental guys. You come in, you play. If you don't, you're going in the transfer portal. You're going to go be someone else's treasure, right? I think it's the ID, and then they're not afraid to go head-to-head. I mean, Justin Williams is a kid they pulled out of Texas. It's not like Texas didn't have a good season. It's not like Texas A&M hasn't got in-state blue-chip talent to stay and play for the Aggies. I think it's the ability to go find the talent wherever it is and be like, hey, you're going to be a linebacker at Georgia, and you're going to come here, and then you're going to go on to get selected. Past 3 NFL drafts, Cooper. 19 defenders out of Georgia have been selected. How many more are they going to have here in 2024? 4 or 5 more guys. If you go to Georgia and you get on the field, you're going to go get a paycheck on Sundays. And I think that's what's working for not only just at the middle level of the defense, but in the trenches and in the secondary. I know you like Chris Cole. You're the one that kind of pushed for him to get that 5th star. What makes him stand out?
Athletic, speed backer, projection, shows up in Orlando. You're like, who is that guy?
I know.
A couple INTs as well. A lot to like about him. So, Emily, no surprise here. Georgia still pretty good at this recruiting thing. We'll send it back to you.
All right, thanks so much. We're going to continue our superlatives with the Big 12, and national recruiting analyst Mike Roach is here to break down the conference for us. Mike, let's start with your instant impact player. It's the highest ranked recruit in Texas Tech history in wide receiver Micah Hudson. But the Red Raiders fans out there want to know, what can he do for them this season?
Well, I talked to Joey McGuire just a couple of weeks ago in an exclusive interview I had with him that I released this morning, and he said flat out in the interview, look, you'll never hear me say we're going to redshirt Micah Hudson. He's been a factor since the moment he stepped on campus. He's already on campus there in Lubbock, early enrolled. Highest ranked prospect in Texas Tech history, you said it. This is a guy that caught 70 balls, 1,300, almost 1,400 yards as a senior, 18 touchdowns, almost 4,000 yards and 47 touchdowns for his career. He is a nightmare in one-on-one situations. I mean, his body control, his understanding and spatial awareness, the way he attacks the ball in the air, he is a guy that defenses are constantly going to have to adjust for. And so Zach Kitley's offense at Texas Tech is set to be a wide open offense. They had some quarterback issues this year with injuries, but I think with a healthy quarterback crew, this is a guy that you see making plays immediately. And he's a guy that defenses in the Big 12 are going to have to account for and adjust to and game plan around.
All right, your pick for sneaky good class is Kansas. What do you like about this number 44 ranked group?
Well, when I was on the show in December, I talked about Kansas getting steals, maybe the biggest steals in the country, in 2 pass rushers, Dekias Brinkley out of the state of Texas, and Deshaun Warner, a top 247 pass rusher out of Arizona. I think those guys headline what Kansas has done on the recruiting trail. And when you talk about the money positions, guys who can get after the quarterback are high up on that list. But it doesn't just stop there. I like their quarterback fit. Isaiah Marshall is a player in the mold of a Jalen Daniels, who we've seen excel in that offense. Austin Alexander, a long and athletic cornerback from the Chicago area. And then Carter Wawrowski, a massive offensive tackle who can set the tone up front, be physical. Kansas likes to run the ball. I think he fits into that. I think that they've clearly identified their type of guys, and I think that they've got a plan going forward with how they want to build that roster, and you're seeing it pay off from Lance Leipold.
Yeah, speaking of some steals, it sounds like TCU got a good one, an edge, Travis Jackson. What is it about him that makes him your pick for Diamond in the Rough?
Well, I think anytime you're talking about a diamond in the rough, it's the ceiling. And he is a projectable guy from a frame standpoint, from an athleticism standpoint. Ran an 11.6 800-meter time, which in most cases wouldn't be that impressive. But for a guy who is, roughly 6'2", 6'3", 230 pounds, it's pretty impressive. Still has some work to do on refining his pass rush technique and things like that. But is a guy that can play against the run, can play against the pass, so you could have him on the field for 3 downs. The player comp we have on him is O'Shawn Mathis, who was a star at TCU. I'm sure that the Horned Frogs would love to get a similar contribution on Travis Jackson as they got from O'Shawn Mathis. And frankly, they need it. I think their defense was a little leaky this year, especially up front. This is a guy that I don't know if he's going to, you'll see him making an impact immediately, but in a year or two down the road could be a big part of a defensive line rebuild for the Horned Frogs in Fort Worth.
All right, there's a lot of great guys coming into the Big 12 in this class, but in my eyes, this feels like a pretty easy pick. The guy for baddest dude is offensive tackle Jordan Seaton. I mean, he's 6'5", 290, but what about his play makes him your pick for baddest dude?
Well, when I sat down to put this list together, I kept, he was kind of what I started with at baddest dude. And I kept going through classes and trying to find guys to top him, and I just couldn't. And the reason is, for a guy at his size, listed somewhere around 6'5", 290 pounds, a massive wingspan, 6'10", those guys aren't supposed to be able to move the way that Jordan Seaton does. He's uncommon in the way he can move. And when you see him kind of cut off defensive linemen on the backside, when you see him climb to the second level and engage smaller players in space, it's kind of terrifying, because you hope if one of those guys is after you, you can at least run around him. And that's not really the case with Jordan Seaton. And what it needed is for Colorado, who obviously their biggest Achilles heel last season was on the offensive line, and getting Jordan Seaton as a guy who could be a potential cornerstone and building block for that group. And I think that it's a step in the right direction for Deion Sanders in Colorado.
Yeah, massive win there for Coach Prime, literally as well. Your pick for Mr. Versatility is Kansas State athlete Trey Davis. Anytime I see a guy listed as an athlete, I've got to ask, where do you think he's going to make the biggest impact at the next level?
Well, that's the thing. He could do it on either side of the ball. He's a 3-sport star. He was a state qualifier in the triple jump in Texas and track and field, and an all-area selection as a basketball player. So he excels literally in everything he does. I like him on the offensive side of the ball playing receiver. He caught for 1,250 yards and 20 touchdowns last season. But he also showed some ball production in the secondary. He's a guy that can run the ball. He's a threat on kickoffs, kickoff returns. He is a guy that you get to campus and you figure out where he can fit. But I think that you like the versatility he brings, because he is just as dangerous of a threat on the defensive side of the ball as he is playing receiver. And I think for a guy like Chris Klieman in a program like Kansas State that prides itself on finding players with traits and developing those traits, this is kind of the perfect ball of play for them to go with.
I love it. Mike, thank you so much for breaking down the Big 12 for us. As always, you can check out more of his work on 247sports.com, especially that interview that he teased there. Definitely go check that out. And we are running a 60% off annual VIP subscription. This ends tonight at midnight, so make sure that you take full advantage. I also believe Mike is going to stick around in the chat, so if you have any questions for him, go ahead and drop them there in the YouTube chat. Well, we are now off to the Pacific Northwest to introduce you to the number 6 player out of the state of Washington. Rahshawn Clark is set to make his college commitment live with us in minutes. But first, let's tell you just a little bit more about this prospect. He is our 21st ranked athlete in the class. He's a 4-star athlete with a 90 rating. So this is a spectacular talent. Now, He originally signed with Arizona in December, but asked out of his NLI after Jedd Fisch left for Washington. I told you you'd be sensing a trend here on the show. The Huskies are one of his finalists still, and he has not quite closed the door on returning to the Wildcats and sticking with Arizona. Before we bring him on, though, Huff, hype him up. What kind of player is Rahshawn Clark?
You know, he was one of the initial top 100 players in the 2024 class, and we launched that thing 3 years ago. Player who had an offer as an 8th grader. He already had his first offer then as a defensive back. Now, I've always felt that defense was his position, but his heart was at offense. He had the opportunity to play in high school as a wide receiver, and because of that, Cal started to recruit him as a receiver. He committed to the Bears back in June and was going to play offense there. Ultimately, Arizona, John Richardson, the cornerbacks coach at Arizona, and Jedd Fisch convinced him to come to Tucson. He took an official visit and signed with Arizona, but they wanted him to play defense. He could play on either side of the ball. He could return kicks. He could return punts. When we saw him at the Polynesian Bowl last month, he was returning punts there, but he shined on defense, which is like I said you would, Rahshawn, 3 years ago. I think this guy is a defensive back, and that's what he wants to play now. That I think the further along in his high school career he gets and the closer to college he gets, he's now accepted fully that he's a defensive back, and I think he's one of the most electric DBs that you're going to find out in the West region.
He is getting very close to college, and he's about to tell us where he's headed to school. So let's welcome on Rahshawn Clark to the show. Rahshawn, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. It means a lot. It means the world.
Yes, we are so excited to find out where you're headed, but I've got to ask about this crazy recruitment. We've talked to some guys about just the challenges of going through that coaching change after you've already signed. So what was going through your mind the moment that you found out that the guy that you signed to play for was headed elsewhere?
So it was a lot. I was getting off the plane. I was going to Hawaii for the Polynesian Bowl. So it was a lot. I got off the plane, the interviews, cameras, media, people. But, you know, it's all part of the journey, all part of the process. So I'm all for it.
Well, all of that craziness has made you arrive at this day where you're going to make an official commitment and sign on the dotted line. Rahshawn, you have the floor. Tell us where you are headed to play college football.
Okay, so I just want to give a thanks to the man above. I wouldn't be anything without him. This is a true blessing. I'm beyond grateful to be in this position. What a journey. What a journey. What can I say? With that being said, next 3 to 4 years, go Dogs. I'm coming home. Yeah, go Dogs. Nothing but love for the whole city of Tucson. Nothing but love, but go Dogs.
I love it. There you have it. Rahshawn Clark is committed to Washington. Plans to play with them this fall and hopefully many years to come, representing the Dogs there. First, tell us, why'd you pick Washington?
Ultimately, I just built a great relationship with Coach Fisch, Coach Jay Rich, the coaches that were previously at Arizona that are now at UW. I really truly believe what he did at Arizona, he will do at UW. He's a great coach, and yeah, relationships matter in this business.
Rahshawn, you got your first offer from Washington back when Jimmy Lake was the head coach. You were recruited by Coach DeBoer. Now you're going to play for Coach Fisch like you were planning to in December, but you're going to get to do it in your backyard, in your hometown. What does it mean, especially being the only in-state signing in 2024, what does it mean to be able to play your collegiate career in your hometown of Seattle?
It's a blessing because there is a lot of love I feel from the city. There's a lot of love, and I'm so comfortable here. It's a true blessing. Like, I get to play in my backyard. I go to games. I go to most of the games. Like, it's crazy. And the love from the city, like, I really feel welcomed, and like I can really be me. Like, I love it, and I have a great relationship with the coaches, so it just makes it even better.
Rahshawn, for all the Washington fans watching, what kind of player are they getting?
A competitor, a leader, a ball player, someone that's willing to do anything. Literally, like I'm trying to win. I want to play best where I best with the team. A true competitor, a dog, really.
Literally, I love it. Rahshawn, thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of your big day. Go celebrate. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Love it. You can read
Go Dogs.
more. Go Dogs. He's getting very used to saying that. He'll be saying Go Dogs for a long time. You can read more about this latest ad at dogman.com. They are the place for all things Huskies. Speaking of the place for all things, let's head over to our war room.
Drew, it was a little rocky for Kalen DeBoer once he got the Alabama job for a little bit. Some defections, right? But I started thinking to myself, did Nick Saban give Kalen DeBoer a parting gift? He was a guy that coached the defensive back position. You look at it, how about this? Jalen Mbakwe, Zay Mincy, Xavier Brown. Guess what all three got in common? They got a 5 right next to their name. Drew, I would say, pretty safe to say, because they're the only group that has 3 5-stars. The best group in the country. The other part about this, I looked down, you and I were talking about this, 137 starts that Alabama is going to be missing. You think about guys like Terry Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Jalen Key, Trey Amos. I'm sure I'm missing a couple of guys. Caleb Downs as well. That's a big one. Glad you brought that up. And then you think about some guys that haven't got some run that have left as well. Antonio Kite, Jake Pope, Earl Little, Desmond Ricks. All those guys are in the portal. So you talk about these 3 5-stars, and we're not really used to saying this, especially in the secondary. Like Caleb Downs is the exception, right? We haven't really seen a guy like that maybe since Minkah Fitzpatrick. Now you look at these 3, Mbakwe, Mincy, go down the list, Xavier Brown. Hey, you might not be ready, but welcome to the SEC. We need you today.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, baptism by fire for those 3 because they're going to need them. And there's going to be a transfer portal window. Kalen DeBoer is going to have a chance to bring in some veterans, but these guys got to be ready to go right away. And I think it's the good thing, Cooper, like you said, not only are they 5-star prospects, but they complement each other well.
All right, well, let's start with that conversation. They all have different skill sets, but the first guy who jumps out to you the most, that Andrew Ivins turns on the tape and you say, wow, I get the most excited about seeing this guy in Tuscaloosa.
Xavier Brown. I think he's the most technically advanced cornerback in the 2024 cycle. I've been saying that for well over a year now. I think we've approached 13 months I've been saying that. He's got the size, had to measure him at the All-American Bowl to make sure he was over 6 foot and had the long arms, playing his best football as a senior, 3 interceptions in the playoffs. We saw him at the All-American Bowl, one of the only cornerbacks there that could hang with a guy named Jeremiah Smith. So technically I think he's advanced. Is he going to be excellent in run support? I don't know. Going to need to get him in that strength program, but he's already been through bowl practices with the Crimson Tide. So Xavier Brown for me is a guy that I think, the other 2, they're the ones dripping with traits. I think as a football player, Xavier Brown's the most ready to go right now.
I think you got some validation with that one, right? I mean, you were banging the drum to Xavier Brown for about 13 months. He shows up in San Antonio. That was kind of like the last checkbox that we needed to see. He shows up there. Like you said, you talk about a technically mature game, guys that should be able to contribute early, playing at one of the best programs in the country in modern day. Let's talk about these 2 other guys. Can I talk about a guy for a minute? How about Jalen Mbakwe, man? You talk about a guy that's got all the traits. You said it best. He is a long 5'11". If there ever was such a thing.
He's the tallest 5'11" in the class.
He's that dude, and this guy ended up being the number 2 cornerback in the country. And you think about the state of Alabama, absolutely dripping with talent this year. You see the pro comp there, Stephon Gilmore. Smoke talked earlier in the show about the traits of Ellis Robinson being a sticky corner. Here's the thing about Jalen Mbakwe. I don't think he's played corner in about 3 years. He played quarterback for Clay Chalkville, led his team to a state title in the state of Alabama. Drew, you think about everything this guy can do, has a sub-10 500 meter to his name. The speed is there. The play speed is there. You talk about a box checker, and then we see him live between Orlando at the Under Armour All-America game. You also go down to Hattiesburg, Alabama, Mississippi. For a guy that hadn't played defensive back in 3 years, he was playing corner, he was playing nickel, he was also playing the deep hash as well. So you think about Alabama being able to plug and play him. I know some things have changed, but I think this is a guy that can get on the field early. The other part of this, not just the athlete and the player, the instincts and the feel for the position. I think there is so much to say about a guy that's played quarterback, also played receiver, played running back, and played defensive back because they have such an instinctive feel to the game. Right. He was one of the most heady defenders I think we saw over the last month. I love this kid. I think he's going to be a breakout day one type of guy in T-Town.
I kind of also love what we saw in between the reps, right on the sidelines. He's kind of like an alpha competitor type of dude, chumming it up with the wide receivers. I also like the fact that he's not afraid to use his hands. I'm a guy that has to take photos sometimes of the practices. He's grabbing jersey, right? It's not like he doesn't know what he's doing. He gets away with it. All right, Zay Mincy, the last one for Alabama. I compare him to Terrion Arnold. Terrion Arnold, who Daniel Jeremiah has as his number one cornerback heading into the 2024 NFL draft. It was the same story. Two-way star, multi-sport athlete coming out of the Sunshine State. Is he a safety? Is he a corner? Well, Terrion Arnold proved us wrong. He stayed out on the boundary and on the perimeter. I think Zay Mincy might be able to do the same. Had an excellent week there in San Antonio. Cooper, you have been raving about this guy. He's a guy in my backyard, down the street from the Buc-ee's in Daytona Beach. I know you're happy he's got 5 next to his name.
Shout out Buc-ee's. Hey, the other thing here, 33-inch arms, 79-inch wingspan. That's 6'7" for a guy that's 6'1". The other thing I really like about this guy, you see the traits, you watch him on tape, and immediately you think safety. And then you get around him in person, and you say, man, this guy can stick. He also ran mid-4.5s as well. I think that's going to improve, obviously, once he gets to Alabama. So in terms of what Alabama's doing in the secondary, this is a great start for Kalen DeBoer because we all know the potential of what Alabama can be offensively. It's defensively, can this team do enough? Can Kalen DeBoer recruit the same caliber of players that Nick Saban did? He has done that in the first cycle. Whether you give him credit or not, it's a good thing that he got these guys across the finish line. We talked about another program earlier in the show at the point of attack. Guess what? This is an important position as well. You talked about NIL and being able to allocate your resources the right way. Well, where do you do that? Defensive line. You also do that in the secondary at the corner position as well. Drew, you're looking at a sneaky good class here. How about Oregon, the Ducks? You go down the list. Ife Obadegwu, maybe a guy that we're kind of flying blind on a little bit from Baltimore, St. Francis. He shows up in Orlando, and you're like, hey, it's one of the cleanest guys out here. Checks a lot of boxes, a lot of verified measurements, but in terms of a guy that can just match up man-to-man, position versatile, do a lot of different things, he's that guy. Go down the list. Aaron Flowers, like him a lot, out of Texas. Dakota Fields, a long guy that can run. Got a lot of verified metrics to his name. Kingston Lopa, I'm not even sure what he is. Hybrid guy, can do a lot of stuff with him. Drew, Oregon, to me, like, the game has revolved around position versatility. And you think about the multiplicity and how you attack opposing offenses. And I'm sure Oregon and Dan Lanning, probably the thing that kept them up at night was how the hell do we stop Kalen DeBoer, right? So we got to go out and get some guys who can match up man-to-man with the guys of Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan throughout the world. Mission accomplished in my eyes. I love what they brought in the secondary.
Sticky Iffy can do it on the outside, right? No, he had a heck of a performance in Orlando. Had a pick 6 in the game. Was a top performer all 3 days. And Cooper, what I like about him, he is battle-tested at St. Francis Academy. They played one of the hardest schedules ever in high school football history. Coast to coast went around. And he held his own out on the perimeter. You go back and watch the senior tape, and you're like, okay, this guy can maintain phase. He can find the football. He's got the size. And then Aaron Flowers, he was a surprise in San Antonio as well. So you think about that defense. We already talked about the quarterback situation there at Oregon, but they're loading up at the key spots.
You got 2 or 3 sentences here. Tell me what you like about Florida State, because I know you like that class too.
3 future NFL corners, right? This past NFL draft, 36 corners were selected. 22 of them were over 6'1". Charles Lester, Jamari Howard, Kai Bates, all over 6'1". Pat Surtain, the cornerbacks coach there, he's a former high school coach, played in the NFL, was with the Miami Dolphins. He knows what he's looking for. Obviously, his son's in the NFL. It's a sneaky good group. He's a good recruiter, but he's a better coach.
That was more like 12 sentences, but we'll take it. We got the point across. Florida State, very good class coming in the secondary. Back to Studio A.
All right, we are running a 60% off promo on 247sports.com, so make sure that you exercise that. Yeah, that is for the annual VIP subscription. That's where you get all that good information. Let's get you caught up on what happened on National Signing Day with some headlines. First, 5-star athlete Terry Bussey entered the day, an unsigned Texas A&M commit, but he officially puts pen to paper. Huff, what does this win mean for Mike Elko?
Well, it means that he's gotten off to a great start by getting the electric Bussey on board. He's going to probably be a guy that's going to be able to impact the game, at least offensively, at least in the special teams game. But seeing him play in the defensive secondary, he had an interception in the Poly Bowl. Don't be shocked if Mike Elko, being the defensive guy that he is, finds a way to put him in the secondary and get some time. Very much like Travis Hunter was able to play both ways for Deion Sanders. Mike Elko now has a signature recruit in Terry Bussey by getting that signature this morning. There's much more easy breathing going on in College Station today.
Yeah, and even more good news for the Aggies as top 247 wide receiver Ashton Bethel-Roman also signing with Texas A&M today. The former Arkansas signee was released from his NLI, reopening that recruitment. So, Smoke, what can he do for the Aggies?
Well, I'd love to see this one-on-one matchup at practice some days with those two guys going against each other. But at the end of the day, you got a silky smooth playmaker with Velcro-type hands and a crazy catch radius. Put it anywhere, he's snagging and bringing it down.
More 5-stars signing today. The number 8 player in the class, wide receiver Ryan Williams, is officially a member of the Crimson Tide. He had decommitted and then recommitted, officially signing today. Also, the number 1 player in Louisiana, defensive lineman Dominic McKinley, signing with the home state school of LSU, and wide receiver Gatlin Bear signing with Oregon. Now, happening minutes ago, Seattle native Rahshawn Clark picking the hometown Huskies. He will follow Jed Fish to Washington, and he told us he is so excited to rep his city. Earlier on the show, one of the top prospects out of Arizona, defensive lineman Keona Wilhite, officially committing to Nebraska. What a win for Matt Rule as the Huskers now finish with a top 20 class. We have had a lot of fun on this show, which means that, guys, it's time to almost wrap it up. But before we get there, we want to hit some of our final thoughts. As always, the point of National Signing Day and the point of recruiting is to get better and to get closer to that national championship. So we're going to list some teams that we believe got better today. Huff, you like what Oregon has been able to do in this cycle. What did they do to take a step closer to that national title?
There's a dearth of defensive linemen out west, and Oregon got all of the best ones, whether it was Elijah Rushing, Aiden Breland, and Jericho Johnson. It's going to be a couple of years till they get Gatlin Bear on campus. He's going to serve his LDS mission. But to get a 5-star receiver after he visited during the season, saw 2 1,000-yard receivers under Junior Adams, who's done a great job developing receivers throughout his time. Dan Lanning addressed needs on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. They have the number 3 class heading into the Big Ten in their first year this fall. I like what Oregon has done to get over that hump and now be in contention for a playoff berth. Whether it was expanded to 12 or it stayed at 4, Oregon went 0-3 against Washington these last 2 years, and it cost them playoff berths in both those years. I think that this is the kind of class that gets them across the hump and makes them not just a contender for a Big Ten title, but potentially a national title.
Speaking of a contender for a national title, anytime Georgia is playing football, they are definitely going to be in that race. Certainly helps if they finish the cycle with the number 1 overall class. Smoke, how did the Dogs get better this cycle?
How scary is it that you don't lose a game for 29 weeks, you lose 1, then all you do is reload, restock, and you have a crazy class with guys with athleticism, prototype, mass, and size at the offensive line, and guys on the perimeter in terms of corners and skill players are sticky and just impact players. It's scary to be in the SEC right now with Georgia doing what they're doing.
Yeah, Georgia finishes with the number 1 class. Ohio State finishes with the number 1 player in Jeremiah Smith. Overall, though, how'd the Buckeyes get better this cycle?
Well, I think you just said it. Jeremiah Smith. You know, I've been really worried about Ohio State's ability to attract receivers these last few years. They've only had, every one of them, but getting what we consider to be the best player in the country, one of the best receivers to come out in probably the last decade is huge. But it's not just about Jeremiah Smith. It's what they've done defensively with Edric Houston, with Aaron Scott, with Bryce West, what they've done in the portal, getting Julian Sane to come in. Oh, by the way, they also got the SEC Freshman of the Year and Caleb Downs to come in and join that secondary. Ryan Day knows that he is on the hot seat. He's lost, 5 games, 6 games in that time, but he's on the hot seat because of what happened at Michigan. Jim Harbaugh's gone. He's been able to put together an elite class at Ohio State, a great portal class, but to get the number 1 player in the country, and more importantly, to hold on to the number 1 player in the country when Miami and Florida State were both trying to flip them, that is the big feather in the cap for Ryan Day as he heads into a very, very important year in his time in Columbus.
That was some of our biggest drama during December's signing day, is finding out if Jeremiah Smith would stick with the Buckeyes. He does. They finish with a top 5 class. Smoke, you like what LSU has been able to do. This is a class that's gigantic. Almost 30 players coming in for Brian Kelly. How did the Tigers get better?
Well, shout out to Coop, man. Your state, we all know they have great players, and they got 9 of the top 10 players. Yeah. So what they did was put a big wall and said, nobody's coming in, we're not letting the good players out. And we're going to address this issue back there in the secondary. And those guys up front that's sneaky, that can get after the pass, we're going to do that too. At one point, we knew that LSU was considered DBU and skill player U in terms of players in Jarvis Green and also my man, Odell Beckham. Like, those guys was awesome. Now they're getting back to winning in that state, winning players, and having explosive players on both sides of the ball.
It's looking good down in the Bayou. We got to talk about, though, the teams that took a step back this cycle. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. Washington, what did you wish that they would have done?
Well, I think capitalizing on a big season, and not just the 2023. Maybe they'll get that bump in 2025. And this is even before Kalen DeBoer departed. Coming off the 2022 season that they had, the 11-2 season in that first year, you would have thought there would have been a bump, but there was an emphasis being placed on the transfer portal this year. You look at the majority of their roster that played for the national title last month, it was seniors, fifth-year seniors, COVID year guys, so they knew they were going to have to backfill with the portal, and they seemed to focus on the portal and didn't have as much of an emphasis in the high school recruiting. I think with Jedd Fisch coming in, knowing that, hey, we got to fill some spots with the portal, but knowing how aggressive he was at Arizona with recruiting high schoolers, I think you're going to see Washington revert to how they did under Chris Peterson, where the majority of that class that we were talking about that played in the national championship game were Chris Peterson era recruits. Hey, shout out Coop. He helped pull those teams when he was a DPP there. But Washington can get back to that. They just played for a national title. Jedd Fisch wasn't coaching it, but the school he's coaching at just played in it. He needs to emphasize that you could play for a national championship here and get those guys to come and potentially say you can be an NFL draft pick playing here as well. Yeah.
A lot of proof in the pudding there in Washington. Just got to use it on the recruiting trail. Clemson, they have proof of concept as well, winning a few national championships. Smoke, they finished with 2 5-stars, but why do you think this is a team that took a step back this cycle?
Because the typical Clemson, they win in recruiting. They win in top players, not just 2. Usually that list has 5 to 10. And then when you look at the middle of the pack guys, they have developmental players. Not saying that they don't have players that can help them win, but this is Clemson. They beat Alabama twice in the national championship game, right? That's not the expectation of Clemson, and they're taking a step backward. They should be in the top 5. Now they're out of the top 10. Can't win with that.
Huff, you talked about how excited you were about Oregon's class as they make the move to the Big Ten. Conversely, UCLA, number 38 ranked class. That's not something that we typically see from what was traditionally a Power 5 program. Still working on what we're going to call that going forward. But what is it about this Bruins class that has you a little let down?
Well, it's the fact that there's hardly anybody in it. This is the 92nd ranked class on 24/7 Sports. This is a program that is in Los Angeles. It's in California. It's had a coach that coached in the NFL as a head coach, who coached in the national championship game, and there has been little to no effort to recruit high school. They have relied so heavily on the portal, and this year it blew up in their face. They've not only lost a ton of players in the portal, they lost them across town to USC, but they're backfilling with players from the Division III ranks, the service academy, so they're not making equal trades, and there just doesn't seem to be an emphasis on high school recruiting. And going into the Big Ten, they had the 17th class out of 18, and the team that was 18th, Northwestern, had their coach get fired in mid-July. Well, there shouldn't have been a July signing period. Okay, Smoke, I'll give you that one. But then they didn't take the interim label off their coach until the middle of the season. That's the only school you beat, and you knew for the last year and a half you were headed to the Big Ten. It didn't seem like they were prepared for it. So these have got to change. And as we talk, Chip Kelly is potentially interviewing for another NFL coordinator job. It already cost him Keona Wilhite in the last week. It cost him a lot of recruits. And right now, they just don't seem to be prepared for this move from a recruiting standpoint.
All right, 30-second Smoke. Texas A&M is a team that you believe took a step back despite getting 2 big signees today.
Recipe of disaster. Lost your staff, lost your top recruiter, lost a lot of guys that decommitted. Top 10 players. Got to take a step backwards when you were one of the better recruiting schools for the last 3 years. Going from top 5 out of the top 10, can't win that.
Yeah, those coaching changes are tough. We're going to give Mike Elko some time, though, aren't we, Smoke?
Grace, we can give him some time. That's what we want to do. It's called grace. But in college football, grace is not rewarded.
All right.
Wins are.
All right, thank you, guys. Let's send it over one more time to our war room.
College football playoff will be expanding from 4 teams to 12 teams in 2024. Drew, National Signing Day, we're going to put a bow on this thing for the last time here. And the teams that we're buying stock in.
We're buying future tickets.
Future tickets. So maybe a little bit of unconventional stock. Start with NC State, ranked number 27. You like what they've done.
Epic wide receiver haul. Jonathan Paylor, another Casey Concepcion. He's coming back. Terrell Anderson, you can go up and down the list. Jameer Boston, Christian Zachary, Keenan Rogers, Noah Rogers coming from the transfer portal. I love this group. And they got Grayson McCall as a bridge quarterback, a guy that has a ton of experience. Cedric Bailey should be viewed as a quarterback of the future. I'm all in on Dave Dorn.
I like Elijah Groves too from Tennessee. Big athletic profile linebacker, second level. The other thing, Brian Doan mentioned it earlier in the show, they're getting it done in the transfer portal as well. So you got to give NC State a lot of credit, a team that can make another leap here in 2024. Drew, I'm going to go with Auburn, man. Ranked number 10 here in 2024. I think this program is ascending. You think about the job that they have done in the state of Alabama. How about teams with a lot to gain with Kalen DeBoer coming to Tuscaloosa? Until he can prove it, I think Hugh Freeze is in a prime time spot. How about Cam Coleman, Amaris Williams, 2 5-stars there. Perry Thompson, we love him. We've talked about the athletic profile of a guy like Walker White. They flipped to Marcus Riddick from Georgia, Jamonte Waller from Florida. I don't know about you. That's big boy recruiting. That's what you're supposed to do. That's why Hugh Freeze was brought to the Plains. I love what Auburn's got cooking.
And Nick Saban's no longer in Tuscaloosa. I think they're just going to keep this going. We saw it when he first got there. Keldrick Falk, Kay and Lee, those are 2 guys they flipped from other schools. I love the direction of it.
All right, let's get weird. We said we're going to get weird. We said this was a Wisconsin desk, Studio B. That's what we're doing here, the War Room, Wisconsin. Tell me what you like about the Badgers.
It's NFL guys, right? The Pro Day in Madison a few years from now is going to be all 32 teams are going to be there. Dylan Johnson, he's a bull in the china shop. This offensive line haul is probably ranks number 2 for me behind Georgia with all that mass, the Great Wall of Athens. I think defensive backs, you could just go up and down the list. I see the vision for Luke Fickell.
Hey, pardon my take here, if you want to call it that, knock on wood. How about this? Texas A&M number 16. We just heard Smoke's vantage point on this. I agree with him. You got to recruit at the top, but guess what? That's a hard thing to do in a couple of weeks. Mike Elko coming in from Duke. You kind of like what they put together late here in 2024.
They just won signing day. They go from 22 to 19. Terry Bussey, Mike Elko went head-to-head with Brian Kelly and Kirby Smart, and he won. I think that's a big deal. I think that's a good sign of things to come in College Station.
Ashton Bethel Roman, love what they're doing in the personnel department as well. Drew, we got a little bit of time. Another team out there that maybe has piqued your interest. Who do you like?
What about Miami? We kind of touched on them with the defensive line. We saw the offensive line, Mario Cristobal. You look at that recruiting class, he has gone national, but he's also recruiting in-state, double-digit players from the Sunshine State. Interesting, just kind of given the dynamic of the big 3 there with Florida, Mike Norvell, their magical undefeated season. I think Miami, you said it, their schedule sets up pretty well here in 2024.
Like what Miami has done. How about Marcus Freeman, man, going into year 3? I've been pretty critical of Marcus Freeman. I wondered how it was going to look different from Brian Kelly. I think he's continued to kind of separate himself at Notre Dame from what we've seen in the past. The ability to acquire top-end talent in South Bend, ultimately at the end of the day, is going to be the thing that separates those type of coaches. I like what they've done. We talked about Bryce Young. We talked about Viliamu Asa. They go out, they get Kedron Young. And the other thing, Drew, we always talk about it. I love what they've done in that quarterback room. The last 2 years, you get Hartman, you get Riley Leonard, you bring in Mike Denbrock. It's like all of a sudden, like Marcus Freeman's got his big boy pants on. I love what Notre Dame is doing. We're talking about going from 4 to 12 futures picks. Dude, give me some love on Notre Dame here.
How about 2 more in the SEC? South Carolina, another 5-star Dylan Stewart. I know he signed last year, but we saw him in the Under Armour game after adding Nicholas Harbor. Shane Beamer as the recruiter. I don't think we saw this. Back-to-back top 32 guys. And then Ole Miss. Did it in the transfer portal. Best high school class they've had in a while.
I love it, guys. Not to mention, just a reminder, you can find the Oyster Boys every Tuesday and Wednesday on the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Back to Studio A.
I love it. Thank you, guys, and thank you to our entire scouting team. This is when we close the book on the 2024 cycle. You guys have kept us updated on all things happening there. Thank you to our producers who put the show together, Kenny Williams, our lead producer here, and thank you to our analysts and our team site reporters and everybody that made this National Signing Day and National Signing Week so special. And it is not over yet. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for a special college football recruiting show. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock Eastern, we have guests, we have a live commitment, we got some surprises as we officially turn the page to the 2025 class. And once again, we are offering 60% off all annual subscriptions on 247sports.com. The promo ends at midnight, so make sure you take advantage. Thanks again for watching, and happy National Signing Day.